Happy Friday the 13th. John Emmett is on, saying hi from Vila Moura in Portugal. Pedro Foiling Sailor in Sydney. Sailing and Rescue Swimmers, a.k.a. John Schaefer's in Annapolis. Peter Taylor in New York. Warren Schasser in Brisbane. Gordon Smith in Denmark. Tier de Jong in SoCal, normally in, SoCal or in the Low Countries. Ted Ryman in Cape Town, South Africa. Nice to have you all on. This could be quite a show. Buckle up. We've not only got the two rules experts, longtime friends Hamish Ross and Bryan Willis, but a lot of other info, including, as you can see here in the show notes, a preview of, did I put that in the show notes? Yeah, I got a preview of both Sail GP and some other things. Hamish Ross standing by down in Auckland. Bryan Willis in London. I think he's in London. I'm not 100% sure. We'll have to ask him. John Emmett, remember to share your own profile. Yes, I will, John. Alex Kent here in Cali as we count down the last few seconds to get this show off the dock.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to show number, 583, Friday the 13th of November, December, January already, Julia.
Yes. And Friday the 13th has become a very lucky number these days because it's winning lots of grand.
Grand what? What, you talking about the lottery or something?
Yeah.
Big lotteries. You had some real big lottery. Put your mic up just a touch, would you please? Yeah, and there's one other Friday the 13th this year. Do you know what month?
It's got to be February.
October. Yeah, any month that begins on Sunday has a Friday the 13th in it. That's a fact I learned yesterday preparing for this show.
I'm glad to know that.
It's a big fact. Let's get on with this because it's going to be a big, long show. We got a lot of cool stuff going on. This, of course, the pre-start. I've changed this slide as well. Do you recognize that town, Julia?
Yes.
What town? Not Seattle.
Auckland.
Not Auckland, but
No.
Good. I mean, it's a good guess because it looks with that tower.
Yeah.
That is Toronto. That is what used to be called the CN Tower in Toronto, as Paul Henderson would say.
Yeah.
That's the Toronto Island Sailing Club here, getting ready to start a race, the AP flag there. But we're not going to AP. We're going to get right onto this. I want to start by thanking Andrew McIrvin. That show, we had some audio problems. Apologies again for that. It was not Andrew's fault. It was not even Skype's fault. That was a problem here, which we have fixed, I can tell you reliably. But this was a terrific show, good information, notwithstanding the three audio problems we had. Go back and listen to it if you missed it, right, Julia?
Yes, it was amazing, all the things that were covered.
Well, and once again, he's been right really all along.
He has.
And a lot of people said it's nice to have just plain spoken, straight ahead information, no perceived bias. And, everybody says follow the science.
Yeah, right.
And hopefully Andrew does that in spades. Let's give you a quick update because we were covering with Andrew the RORC's transatlantic race. Now, this is a slide from a screen grab from the tracker from about an hour and a half ago. And you could see then that, let me go back in on it. In fact, I'll go to camera 4 here. You can see that Maserati is just about to go out of loop, and Snowflake and Zulu right behind them. Here is, again, this is about an hour and a half ago. They only had 10 nautical miles. That is, Maserati only had 10 nautical miles to sail. Here's the DTF distance to finish, and distance sail. So they've sailed 3,200 miles and change. 10 nautical miles, and that was an hour and a half ago, and they were going 22 knots. So I assume they finished. Any of you that are looking at the tracker, let us know. Now, I talked to Andrew. I haven't talked to him this morning because he was flying down to Guadeloupe from London, and he was hoping to get there. He was hoping to get there before Maserati does.
Yeah.
But it doesn't look like he was going to. He said he might get there about the same time by the time he gets to the club. So they're going to do the prize giving on Saturday for first to finish, or at least for the tries in Maserati's case. What other comments here? Maserati finished and broke the record.
Wow.
Sailing rescue swimmers, that's John Schaefer, another one of our offshore experts, say five and a half hours. By 5.5 hours and 45 minutes. Is that right, John? Warren Schasser's on here Monday the 16th, start of International OK Dinghy Nationals at the RQYS down in Brisbane. And down in Brisbane relative to us, over 60 boats registered. That is cool. Mark Orton Reed's in Washington, D.C. Jody Shields is on, up early in Sydney, where in SYD it's 08:05. It's not that early. Jody's saying, hello to everyone, wherever you are in the world. Enjoy today, as it's not a luxury that's afforded to everyone. Indeed, that is true. Toronto, Clark Chapin got it. Ryman got it. Everybody pretty much got that. Good luck on the Mega Millions, Julia. Alex Kent is saying 1.3 billion. Steve Groover's updated now that it's 5 days, 5 hours, 45 minutes is the elapsed time. And yeah, that makes more sense. You can see here, this is an hour and a half ago, 5 days. So that makes a lot of sense. Thanks, everybody, for that. Let's get into current state of affairs here in California. It started raining again this morning, didn't it, Julia?
It did.
Now, this is something that we're worried about here on Marina Boulevard. That is the appearance of the Loch Ness Monster. And Hamish being a Scot, we thought we might check in with him, and he's grinning down there. We'll get to him in a sec, but he could probably open. In fact, I'll tell you what, I'm going to bring Hamish and Bryan in right now, because you never know. They are. Oh, Bryan, we lost your signal just as we clicked onto you.
There he is.
There he is. He's working on it. Hamish, and down in Auckland, what do you know about the Loch Ness Monster?
Good morning, Tom. Good morning, Julia. Look, the Loch Ness Monster is a good tourist attraction, but I think any photograph of it has been disproved to be a fake. So anyway, take it as you will.
Yeah. Well, that is courtesy. That shot is courtesy of our Commodore, outgoing Commodore. He's just about done. In fact, when's our AGM? Next Tuesday?
Yep.
Pete Gilmore done a great job as our Commodore of St. Francis Yacht Club. He sent that along. Did I say Guadalupe? I mean Grenada. Of course I mean Grenada. I have Guadalupe on the brain as the finish for that race. Thank you, Clark Chapin, for that. Meanwhile,
I've got to say, Tom, that the weather, looking at the weather at San Francisco, pretty much matches the weather in the Coromandel, where I'm currently situated.
Well, I'll tell you what, Hamish, we're going to get to that in a minute as well. You won't be surprised. Meanwhile, in California is the title for that shot. Thanks again, Pete Gilmore. Now, Julia, do you know who that is?
Yep.
Michael Jabara and Clark Chapin. He's just been in Plymouth, Michigan not with you, but taking care of his mom, getting her into a home and getting her arranged. He's a St. Francis member and a FOSI. He's one of these guys that does give us a few bucks every month and then some. He made the executive decision to skip San Francisco. He looked at the weather and he flew from Michigan to your favorite corner of the world, Julia. To Hawaii. And that's where he is. I caught up with him this morning by text. He's sending us links to show. We really appreciate it when the FOSI send us links to shows and other stuff. He is a clever FOSI on many levels, and including and especially skipping over the Bay Area
I know.
today. Because it started raining again, Julia, this morning. Cats and dogs.
Yes.
Have you checked the garage this morning?
I haven't.
I did. It's back at it. We're getting the poopy upwelling in the garage again. I'm going to have to clean that. Now, Hamish mentioned a minute ago what's going on in New Zealand, and on the Coromandel in particular. You've had what was that called, Hamish? Cyclone Hale, was it?
Yes, it was an ex-tropical cyclone Hale. It's characterized as now a tropical storm, which has passed New Zealand. But what you see there was an early shot, and there's a much more recent shot where that bank is now right on top of that bank is now being eaten away by.
Hamish, hang on. Don't get ahead of me. Meanwhile, in New Zealand, now what, Hamish, you know, but don't tell anybody. What yacht club is that, Julia, in the Coromandel? Any idea?
No.
Hamish knows. Probably if any other Kiwis are on here, they'll know. Anyone else know? Stingray saying he hopes that we raise the beamer up to the rafters next to the dinghy. Anyone know that yacht club? In the Coromandel. Steve Groover. Steve Groover's got it. What were you saying, Hamish?
Well, they might know it in its earlier formation of an old Ford Zephyr and that might jog a few memories.
Yeah, Luca Craig in Auckland's got it. And by the way, there's a comment here from John Lamberts Van Buren saying, Hamish Ross, that comment about the Loch Ness Monster was nonsense, and you know it. The monster was there long before photography was invented, and it will reside at Loch Ness long after we are all gone.
Well, he's right, of course.
Huh?
He's right, of course.
You think?
Of course.
Oh, dear. Well, Julia, back to this club. Several of them have identified it as the Mercury Bay Boating Club, which, of course, was the challenging club when Michael Fay and New Zealand, the Big Boat Challenge for the 1988 America's Cup AC-27 in San Diego, when Dennis Conner and San Diego Yacht Club. And I was involved in that, as you know, Julia and Hamish. Yes. And Bryan knows as well. And that is the Mercury Bay Boating Club up north of where Hamish is. We're going to get to Hamish's map in a minute, but you can see Mercury Bay Boating Club. And it looks like Whitianga, but Hamish, if I'm correct, it's pronounced Whitianga in Maori. Is that right? With an F, the WH?
That's correct. That's a very good pronunciation. You always done some time.
Well, we study these languages, you know. So that's the Mercury Bay Boating Club. And the other day, Tuesday, they lost their front deck, armed with headlamps and saws, and members of the Whitianga-based Mercury Bay Boating Club were at the ready on Tuesday night to save their clubhouse by sacrificing the building's deck to the ferocious seas whipped up by Cyclone Hale. So you thought we had it bad here, Julia.
Oh, yeah.
Look at that.
That's awful.
Cyclone Hale. Club Commodore Jonathan Klein said the situation was grave, and after high tide, and I guess it was, to be fair, at high tide at 10:40 p.m., accelerated efforts were being made to relocate the club's premise further inland. Hamish, it would have been easier if that were that old Ford Zephyr that was their original clubhouse back in 1988. Yes?
Well, I could have just pushed it back inland nice and easily, but I understand the club's going to go back a couple of 100 meters from the foreshore. So, yeah, anyway, it's the clubhouse itself is safe and it'll obviously be moved slightly.
Well, once again, you're getting ahead of me here, Hamish. There's the deck being removed. They were going to lose the deck into the ocean, so they marshaled their resources. And dawn broke on Wednesday, showing the deck significantly undermined, and it was craned off the site at about 8 a.m.
That's amazing.
Here's the news report.
Well, as Cyclone Hale thrashed the Coromandel, one community building looked likely to be lost to the storm. Mercury Bay Boating Club in Whitianga has a rich history. In 1988, it challenged for the America's Cup. And today, members made the call to do whatever they could to save it. Alice Wilkins reports.
The frantic last-ditch efforts of a community trying to save its boat club, as an unruly ocean threatened what was left of the land it sat on after metres of ground was eroded overnight.
Last night was a really difficult and traumatic night. We've lost at least 3.5 or 4 meters over a 2-tide cycle.
Club members and Whitianga locals were sandbagging and laying concrete blocks from early this morning, preparing for the worst to hit the club building at the next high tide. They removed the building's deck and built a fortress, all without the council granting permission. They felt they had no choice.
This morning we made the very difficult decision to break the law, and we reached out to the community and to the community experts to assist us to build a temporary defense.
Okay, and we got a little more here.
One silver lining from the storm.
At the end of this
It
report.
survived.
It worked through the last high tide cycle. I don't want to test it in something like what I saw last night.
Now it needs to be picked up and relocated so the community doesn't need to fight through the night to save it again.
Okay, Hamish, now tell us what else you know.
Well, I believe the club has been saved, as you've seen from the news report, and plans are now afoot. Councils here are traditionally very slow in granting permissions and consents. And also it's holiday time as well, so nobody would have been at the council to answer the phones anyway. So I commend the yacht club for taking the unilateral action of doing what it did, and I believe that the plans are now afoot to move the building a good 100 meters or so inland to save it for the future.
Well, I guess Julia, that's what you get if you are building things right on the shore.
Yeah.
These days. But we thought we had problems here at the Beach Street Yacht Club. That looks like a hell of a lot bigger problem than we have here. So
it seems to be.
Thank you, Hamish, for that update. I wanted you to know we have equal opportunity weather coverage here on this show.
I think it's remarkable that the building was well enough constructed that they could move it.
Well, we'll see. We'll see what kind of shape it's in after.
Well, even the deck. I mean, that's a big.
Well, indeed. But you are.
Yes.
So
Well,
nice.
summer's taken a leave of absence down. Summer's taken a leave of absence down in the northern part of New Zealand this summer. It's been one of the worst on record. So we've had nothing but rain pretty much the whole time, and succession of storms, and I believe there's another one brewing up in the tropics.
Mm.
When it rains, it pours. Okay, Julia, let's push on here. Do you know what day it is today?
No.
Here's your first clue.
Ooh.
Hamish, Bryan, do your first clue.
Is that Freddie?
Friday the 13th, the movie, which I've never seen and I don't intend to see anytime soon. But as we said at the top of the show, it is Friday the 13th. And as you all know, in some cultures, that's not very auspicious. In some cultures, it is quite auspicious, depending upon, the religion and so on. But it apparently dates back to Norse times, not just, I
didn't know that.
I didn't either. But I just say, Bryan will recall, we have friends who are Italian who will not sit at a table with 13 people at it. The Last Supper and all. Friday the 13th, but that's not what we're really celebrating today. As you saw in the show notes, it's a day about a fancy dessert. There is your first clue about what today really is. Any idea, Julia?
No.
Dame Melba.
Oh, yeah, there we
Well
go.
done.
Oh, yay.
Well done, Hamish. Dame Nellie Melba, born Helen Porter Mitchell, was an Australian operatic, dramatic, coloratura, I had to look up how to pronounce that, soprano, 3 octaves. She became one of the most famous singers of the late Victorian era. So, it goes back to the America's Cup.
Yes.
Almost. She was born 10 years after AC0. And the early 20th century, and was the first Australian to achieve international recognition as a classical musician. She took the pseudonym, I hope Alistair Murray's watching, she took the pseudonym Melba from Melbourne, her hometown. We got people guessing about Pavlova Day. Gordon Smith got it, Peach Melba Day. He's a good Googler. There it is.
Uh-huh.
It is, at least in this country, National Peach Melba Day, January 13th. A French chef, Auguste Escoffier, invented the elegant dessert back in, 1892 or 93, depending upon the source. He created the dessert with peaches, vanilla ice cream, and raspberry sauce while employed at the Savoy Hotel, London. The dessert honored Australian soprano Nellie Melba. I had no idea. The chef was known for naming his creations after famous people. 3 such recipes are celebrated on the calendar, including National Melba Toast Day, also named after the soprano.
If we only knew what Melba toast is.
Well, you know what Melba toast is. That's what you eat when you got a bad stomach. It's that kind of innocuous nothing toast.
I don't know that.
Oh, well, gosh darn. You learn a lot of things here on,
Yes.
This is the sailing, this is now the dessert show, the food show with the Sailing Habit. And there are comments here. Anything to do with Melba toast, Alan Long, he's got onto it. A good Melbourne girl. Alistair Murray is watching. Jeff Ogle can't hang. Have a great weekend. Bye, Jeff. Did Melba reach her highest or lowest notes as the night got late?
Nobody was counting.
Nobody was counting. That's today's National Peach Melba Day. There she is. Just one other thing. I didn't know this. During the First World War, Melba raised large sums for war charities. She returned to Australia frequently during the 20th century, singing in opera and concerts, and had a house built for her near Melbourne. She was active in the teaching of singing at the Melbourne Conservatorium. She continued to sing until the last months of her life and made a large number of farewell appearances. Her death in Australia was news across the English-speaking world, probably beyond, and her funeral was a major national event. The Australian, did you know this, Hamish? The Australian
Oh, I didn't.
$100 note features her image. Did you know that?
I did not.
I didn't either. Probably all the Aussies on here knew that, but I didn't. And I thought that was a good reason to celebrate the 13th of January as Peach Melba Day, notwithstanding all the other things we have to celebrate on this day. Press on here. I think we're having a bit of a problem with, I'm just looking at my monitors here. There's Bryan is back. Bryan, can you hear us okay?
He's on mute.
Unmute yourself, Bryan. I think he had to reboot his computer.
Can you
Loud and clear.
can you hear me?
We got you. We got you. Good. Hope we had an hour and a half.
Everything seems very intermittent.
Well, that I can't blame on Studio B today. Hopefully your internet comes good. But we did an hour and a half tech check yesterday with Hamish in New Zealand on the the Antipodes from London, or vice versa. And Bryan, are you in London, Bryan, or are you down the South Coast? Where are you? I don't know that we're hearing Bryan or that Bryan's hearing us. We had, I'm not kidding, an hour and a half tech check yesterday. Absolutely no problems with anything. It went peachy keen. Bryan, you can't hear us. Hey, Bryan is in tune with the whole Friday the 13th atmosphere. Bryan, can you hear us?
I can hear you
intermittently.
Yeah, well, we can hear you intermittently too. Bryan, you need to move closer to your router. You need to turn off any other devices. Whatever
I hear you intermittently.
Yes. We hear you intermittently too, but you got to improve your Wi-Fi connection to whatever you had on yesterday. The Friday the 13th gremlins have gotten to your system. He's not hearing us. Okay. Hamish, text Bryan, would you? And try to, if he can't hear us, get him to reboot and try again, and we'll press on here in the meantime.
Roger.
Thank you. I think I just saw him reboot. Okay, that gets us to the starting line for today's show, and we're still using this nice shot from the 2022 Rolex Sydney Hobart Yacht Race. And at the starting line, we like to celebrate the Coach's Corner with our good friend and super fozy John Emmett, who's back in Villamora. Have a look.
Hi, Tom, Julia, and all the fozy. Really nice to be talking to you now. I'm in Villamora, and it's quite a nice day today. We've got a really good thermal breeze going on, but it's much easier to talk to you than it was when I was in Weymouth. And the reason for that, it's not that windy anymore. So probably don't actually need a little furry friend, but I can probably talk a little bit longer today because I'm not worried about getting people on the water in a safe way. I should say Weymouth was fantastic, or probably I should say Port and Harbour, but we had a high-level sailors. It was national training, and also really good coaching ratios. I think probably, judging from the number of people on the water, probably had 5-to-1 coaching ratios. So hopefully people saw my little video on YouTube, just showed how much fun it could be sailing in what we would technically call fresh. So that's Beaufort Force 5 to frightening wind conditions. So yeah, it's a lot of fun doing the video. Glad I didn't get hit by a rig. And I think it's time for a quick recap. So we need specific goals, and that's about taking a big subject like upwind and squeezing it down and down and down until we get very specific. So light wind, sailing in strong tide and big wave. That's a good example of an Olympic venue. See if you can think where that might be. So that's a good example. And we need to measure it. So the easiest thing these days to measure is things like body fat, aerobic fitness, body weight, strength, these sort of things. But we need to try and measure other things. And that can help us improve if we calibrate our rig settings. And then we can think where we went fast, where we went slow, looking at GPS. So hopefully you could hear me last time, but I was talking about agreed goals. So this is something that's very clear. If you put it in writing, if it's a verbal contract, people's memory can fade. You know, we had very good conversations a year ago. Maybe your memory, my memory is slightly different. So putting things in writing is very important. And it's not just an agreement in big crude boats. And this is what I was talking about last time. Sometimes the role is just to go out, have fun, and really, you know, have a few beers with your mate and actually to be the first one in the bar at Cowes. Sometimes the agreement is to try and win every regatta you attend, and there's not a right and wrong, but if the crew are thinking this and the owner is thinking this or vice versa, then you're going to get really big problems. The result thing is perhaps the easiest thing to quantify, but it's always dependent on a lot of other people. And there are teams out there who just want to get away and do corporate type fun sailing to get away from the stress of their day jobs, and the most important thing is to have a good time. Likewise, there are teams whose very funding is probably results dependent. So know where you are and get that agreement sorted. And I think the thing people forget, that agreement is still true in single-handers. You know, behind every person on the podium, there's a huge number of support staff. You know, the nutritionalists, the psychologists, the physical trainer, the meteorologist, the logistics support, and of course, you know, the person in the rib. So it's not just one person. You need that agreement, and that aspirational goals becomes very important, so everybody knows what you're trying to achieve. I go to a lot of meetings, like reports for Olympic committees, and you know, you need to be really honest about where you are, where you're trying to get to. So R is for relevant. We used to use it for realistic. I'm going to define that as a smarter goal. So when we put that later. So for this purpose, it's relevant, because we can have really good goals which are completely irrelevant to our sailing performance. We might follow the latest trend. You know, I think CrossFit is very popular now. Is that relevant to the particular part of sailing you do? The answer may be yes, the answer may be no. It depends on the sailing you do. Is rowing relevant to your sport? REA actually used as part of a fitness test. Quite a good correlation there. Cycling, is that good? Is that a good correlation for hikers? I would say it is. You know, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. If you see what 90% of the top sailors are doing, that's probably something you should be doing. And having the goals relevant, the process goals relevant, makes it far easier to achieve your performance goal and ultimately your dream goal, whether that's to win your club championships or Olympic gold medal. So we're going to carry on with the smarter goals, and I'll be talking to you from Villamora for the next few weeks. Looking forward to joining you all on the show. And if you haven't, please share. Always great to have people watching live. It means a bit more banter on the comments, and actually it means it's going to get pushed out to more people. So see you soon.
John Emmett in Villamora for John Emmett Sailing. Get to the front of the fleet. And he's reminding us again, and it's a good point, to share the show now to your pages, please, to your personal pages. And that is your Facebook pages or even the YouTube. Did you get it up? You got comments now, Julia? Good.
Yep.
Okay. My smart co-host and coordinating producer was having problems with her comments. So good to have you back on. Share, like, follow, and share. Julia, you would say that, but you're working over there on your computer.
Yeah, let's do it now.
And that's John says, please share to your own Facebook pages, right, Julia?
Yeah, absolutely.
And Gordon Smith says, John's smart talks are excellent and not just for sailing. Yes, probably is a life skill, life balance. And we're going to have smarter goals before we grow. You know, I think we should, Julia, we should ask John to give us and he's listening. So John, if you're willing and able, I think we should ask you to do let's say I'm going to go to the Flying Scot North Americans this year, and I haven't sailed that boat in 20, maybe 30. I've sailed it maybe once or twice, but I haven't really prepared a campaign. What would you do as a duffer, as a 70-year-old, getting ready to go sail in a national championship in a class that you haven't sailed in? What's the low-hanging fruit? What are the most important things to do before I go off and make a fool of myself at a national? You know, I won it a few times, and I know how to sail the boat, but nonetheless, things have changed. What would you do, John? And give us that advice if you get a chance in one of your future shows, because I think that probably applies to a whole bunch of us. Mm-hmm. Don't you think?
Absolutely.
Okay. Friday the 13th, show number 583, and if we've got Bryan, we're losing Bryan. He's kind of cutting in and out. And I don't know what's happened to his internet connection. We can see that he's on, but he's having problems with his computer, sadly. And we may have to push some of this segment to another show when we get Bryan's technical working. But Yeah, ideally at the championship venue. Time on the water, John Emmett is saying,
Yeah.
but let's see if he gives us some advice. Hamish, I'm going to stick with you, and as I said, you were with us when we did the hour-and-a-half tech check yesterday. Now we got Bryan back. Bryan, how is he moving his computer? How are you doing, Bryan? You're muted, I think. Remember, this guy's one of the brightest people in the sport that we know, and he's an electrical engineer. Bryan, you're intermittent. I can see that. He was complaining about you being intermittent, Hamish, and I think it was his connection, not yours.
Fine.
Bryan, can you hear us? He can hear us, but we can't hear him. Well, again, I don't know what except to replicate whatever you did yesterday, Bryan. We cannot hear you. I'm sorry. Let's have a Helen Long. We have a drinking game here, Hamish. I don't know if you know this. On the guys behind the scenes, let's have a shot every time Bryan gets a word in.
Good idea.
Okay, well, let Bryan get resituated there. I'm going to skip through a couple of slides here that I have for Bryan, and then get to Hamish here. Hamish, I've got some slides for you too, and I want to start with this beautiful scene. Tell us where that is.
Well, that's where I am now, Pawanui Beach on the Coromandel, and what you see is taken from the top of what's known as Pawanui, Mount Pawanui, and looking north. And indeed, if you look very carefully in the horizon there, you can see some islands there. They are the Mercury Islands, and indeed, they're not far away from the Mercury Bay Boating Club that we spoke about earlier. So it's a lovely part of the world, and I'm hoping to get out in the water this afternoon if the weather clears.
Well, there you have it. I didn't show Hamish these maps, but that was a good segue. Here is Pawanui, where Hamish is at his batch. See Hamish's batch, and that BACH is not Bach, it's pronounced batch in New Zealand. Up here in Mercury Bay, and Whitianga is where the Mercury Bay Boating Club is that we showed you a minute ago. How far is that up to Mercury Bay from you, Hamish?
Well, I can tell you by boat it takes me about 45 minutes by runabout, and so that's how far it is. It's quicker by boat than it is by car.
I've spent some time at Hotwater Beach. We had a colleague who bought a place there. And so
the famous Cathedral Cove is just around the corner from Hotwater Beach, and we often take our guests up there to have a look at a beautiful part of the world.
Okay, let's talk about this batch for a minute. Now, this is, according to Wikipedia, does your batch look anything like that, Hamish?
No, it's a little more salubrious than that, but not overly so.
That is a batch. Go ahead.
That's a very traditional holiday home in New Zealand, but they've now tended to be a lot more luxurious than what's on offer there.
Well, that's a batch on Rangitoto Island, according to, again, Wikipedia, who say that a batch, pronounced batch, not a Bach, also called a crib. I didn't know this, called a crib in the southern half of the South Island. Is that right, Hamish?
Yes, that's right. They call them cribs down there, which is probably a better description of some of the earlier style ones.
Lovely.
A crib is used more here in the inner cities, I would say. Wouldn't you say, Julia?
Yes.
Crib. It's a small, often modest holiday home or beach house in New Zealand. Batches are an iconic part of the country's history and culture. In the middle of the 20th century, they symbolize the beach holiday lifestyle that was becoming more accessible to the middle class. So, Hamish, you're not at Rangitoto Island, but you're at your batch, and looks quite fancy from the background there. And really, it looks very, very nice indeed. And where does the word batch come from?
Bachelor quarters.
I'm not entirely sure. I did know once, but I can't place it, to be honest. I'm wondering whether it came from the fact that they used to use fairly basic building materials at the time, and maybe even old car cases.
I always assumed it was batch For bachelor.
For a bachelor pad.
Yeah.
Hamish is avoiding that like the good lawyer that he is. I'm reliably informed, Hamish, that that's exactly what it is. That it was a bachelor pad, and it's a sexist word. Stingray's got it. John Emmett's got it. It's a bachelor pad, right?
Yes, it is, but I don't know anyone who uses it as a bachelor pad when they're married, that's for sure.
Well, we won't tell Samantha how you use it. That's up to you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go back and see if we've dialed in or if Brian's dialed himself in better now. Brian, can you hear us?
Yeah, I've changed my location. I can hear you perfectly now.
Okay. So you changed your location from yesterday. That's why we do tech. That's why we do tech checks, and we don't change a thing once we do a tech check.
Okay.
So
but
good.
I'm trying to get some better lighting.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna proceed here. Your lighting is great. Your headspace is good. All the things we worked on yesterday. Now, gents, we looked at this yesterday, and several of our foes have already brought this up. João Alexander's checking in from Portugal. Graham Sweeney up in Scotland is saying life's a batch.
Right.
But we talked about the shots from the start of the Hobart race, and here is the second shot, screen grabs from this video, which I'm not going to show you again. Law Connect there on starboard tack. Everybody wants to know what your views are, the two of you being rules experts, and also about rules compliance and whether anybody was obligated here to protest and or take a penalty on their own if they realized they were wrong. We're going to cover all that to kick off this segment on sportsmanship, rules compliance, and indeed cheating. Here's the video. Okay, I'll play it again. You can see Law Connect on the right on starboard tack. As the port tacker, my old friend Squark, Mark Bradford, threading the needle. Do we want to look at that one more time and see if Law Connect bore away and headed up, or is it quite obvious that they did? Brian?
Well, nothing's quite obvious from a video from one particular standpoint. But yeah, I mean, but the other question is not only did Law Connect bear away and come up, but did she need to bear away and come up? That's the other question.
And or did she wave the port tacker through?
Well, that's another question, yeah. There's a lot of missing information, I'm afraid, which you only get from a protest. Anyway, the point is Blackjack did not take a penalty.
Correct.
And Law Connect did show a protest flag, I suppose, showing an intent to protest.
Correct.
And I guess had she finished behind Blackjack, she would have proceeded with her protest. And then all would be revealed. But at the moment, we are completely in the dark about what happened. But the point is, you see, if there was a protest, yes, one would address the question whether Blackjack broke a rule and whether she knew she'd broken a rule, because that determines what she should do. If she's not sure she broke a rule, then she can defend the protest. But if she knows she broke a rule, she's duty bound by the fundamental rule to take a penalty. And if she doesn't, she could be seriously penalized, much more than just disqualified.
Now, don't you go into a protest, though, and say, well, of course I didn't realize I'd broken a rule, whether or not you knew that, and just lie through your teeth and say, you know, I will, I didn't know it. Otherwise, I'd have done my turns when I got outside the heads as provided in the sailing instructions. What do you think, Brian?
Well, yeah, I think in this case, you're probably right. But there have been cases, for example, at an Olympic qualifier, I think it was, a starboard tacker had to bear away under the stern of another boat. And it was a female helmsman, shouted, "Do a 720." And the other boat, knowing that she couldn't protest because she hadn't shouted protest, carried on. So at the end, the protest was invalid because she hadn't shouted protest. And so that was the end of it. But it shouldn't have been, because a wise jury chairman would say, okay, well, the protest is invalid. We can't hold the protest. But by the way, what was your position? And the guy apparently would have proudly said, oh, no, I knew I broke a rule, but I knew that she couldn't protest because she hadn't shouted protest. So I carried on.
Yeah.
Now, if that happened, obviously you would not only penalise the port tack boat, but you would probably at least make that boat count the penalty in her overall score. In other words, penalise her more than just disqualification.
A DNE.
What?
A DNE.
DNE, exactly. Yeah. At least, I mean, it could be more. Yeah.
What does DNE stand for?
Do not exclude.
So no throw out.
Yeah, you can't throw that disqualification out. You've got to count it in your overall results.
Now, a lot of people are asking questions. First of all, the jury could have acted, right, Bryan? The jury could have gone ahead and acted anyway, right?
Absolutely.
Having watched
when they found the protest to be invalid, that's the end of that. So the protestor could go out of the room now to show that that protest is not valid and it's not going to go ahead. But now it's a separate question, and a lot of judges are reluctant to do this. But it's a second question to look into the question whether the boat knew. Now, here he was prepared to say he knew, but as you quite rightly said earlier, normally a boat won't do that.
Okay, and let's say they got to Tasmania, they got to Hobart, and the flag was displayed. They took it down at the dock, didn't file a protest. And if you were the jury and you'd seen the video and you saw what happened, and you were reasonably convinced there was an incident, you didn't quite know who was wrong or who knew what, would have you called a hearing as the chairman of the jury?
No, I wouldn't in this case, because there's no collision, for one thing. There's no contact. It could well be that Law Connect waves them through. Well, that's unlikely because they've protested, but they might now decide that they don't really care. I think when boats interact and neither of them care, then it's not up to the jury to start interfering. It's only up to jury. If a jury sees somebody hit a mark, that's a different question, because that is a penalty. That is a infringement against the fleet, if you like, if they don't take the penalty. So there, the jury should get involved and protest the boat. But just boats interacting between themselves, they can wave each other through, they can ignore it, they can say, you owe me one. That's just the way the game is played, I'm afraid.
Okay, now one of the questions is, could have a third party protested even though they saw somebody put up a flag, if they put up a flag themselves, or if they did not put up a flag and get to Hobart and say, hey, they didn't protest, we're going to protest?
Yeah, absolutely. Provided they saw the incident, not just hearsay. If they saw the incident and saw an infringement, then they can protest, yes. They have to put up a flag, by the way. They have to inform the boat that they're going to protest.
Yeah. They had to have put up a flag at the time of the incident?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that answers.
So Tom, if I can just sort of ask Bryan a question here, because it's interesting. So if a boat saw another boat broke a rule, and it was to its advantage that it didn't protest, is that a breach of sportsmanship on the first boat?
What, for not protesting, do you mean?
Yes.
No, it's not. It is arguable that it is, but it's generally accepted it's not.
Yes. So you can take advantage of another boat breaking a rule, and you're not required to protest.
What do you mean take advantage of it?
Or maybe the rule breaking assisted you.
Oh yeah. Yes, that is true. Yeah.
Okay, Bryan, any incidents that come to mind where you did lodge? You told me during Tech Check yesterday something about a regatta at Langkawi with a bunch of opties.
Yeah, that was really a misunderstanding where they all had been told by their coaches that if nobody lodged a protest when they touched the mark, they need not take a penalty. And they were all under that misapprehension. Obviously, all the coaches were, and the coaches had to be re-educated, shall we say.
Okay, well, that's a good segue, I think, into this next segment, if you will. And Hamish, let's start with you, because you're going to talk more, before we get into the specifics of yacht racing and sportsmanship and rules compliance and indeed what is cheating. You were going to give us, the historian that you are, a bit of a broader background, at least on Western thought, about rules compliance and sportsmanship.
Yes, well, sportsmanship isn't confined to just sailing. It's something that all sports tend to have in common to a greater or lesser extent. And if we wind the clock all the way back prior to industrialization, sport was largely limited to the aristocracy and hunting type games and sport, and generally rather localized folk events which didn't have much in the way of rules. And really interfused with gambling pursuits as well. Industrialization brought with it an increase in spare time for other, working people, whether they're middle class or working class people, and that gave an opportunity for increased participation in sport and also spectatorism. At the same time, English public schools, which are in fact private schools for the rest of us, which were educational institutions for young gentlemen, they placed a very high regard on games and sports. And as the young gentlemen left school, they wished to continue their sports. And that gave rise to, particularly during the 1860s, a great codification and rationalization of their games. And in many ways, it gave us many of our modern games, whether it's football. Cricket was codified a little bit earlier, but it continued towards a greater codification. We had tennis coming in, and many of the sports we enjoy today formed in their recognizable modern shape as yacht clubs and other sporting clubs were founded. The concept of sportsmanship is founded in the concept of a gentleman, and I mean that not in its sexist sense, but in generally a code of conduct, and that's really based in Romanticism, an arts movement, and that was really focusing on the Middle Ages as opposed to the classical Greek and Roman times, where knightly virtues were valued. And perhaps one of the classic novels of the time was Sir Walter Scott's Ivanhoe, is perhaps a classic example of that. And as Victoria came along, we as a society recognized them as Victorian values, in rejection of the earlier Georgian values, which tended to be somewhat considered disreputable behavior and scandalous. And the Victorian values placed a high value on the heroic, and essentially sportsmen were encouraged to be honorable, fair, ethical, respect, and enjoy the game for its own sake. And in many ways, it probably can be distilled into probably a quasi-religious statement of do to others as you would have them do to you. And that's really enshrined the Victorian and amateur sport ethic of sportsmanship. In more recent times, and I'm really only talking decades here, as sport has become more professional, a greater value has been placed on winning, which to some extent has left sportsmanship in the back seat. And as professional role models develop, it does create a bit of a conflict between the sportsmanship and the amateur values or Victorian values, which are still valued by all sports. And some of the role models who place a greater value on winning, and sometimes winning at all costs, creates quite a conflict. And I guess the Victorian values and sportsmanship can be almost distilled into the statement: it's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. And that, I guess, is a nutshell of the development of modern sport and the concepts of sportsmanship. Of course, sailing has been around. It's one of the very early sports, and the formation of clubs continued during the very early or late Georgian, early Victorian era and beyond. And it's quite interesting to see that whole romanticism, knightly virtues of gentlemanlike behaviour is still instilled in our sport of sailing.
Julia, you're doing a lot of shaking your head, yes. And I see some comments, Stingray saying, fantastic answer by Hamish. Gordon Smith saying, it's just not cricket.
Yes.
It's just not cricket.
Yeah.
I want to bring Bryan back in here and ask, see if there's any other comments. Zhao Alexander's going to hop. But Bryan, let me ask you and Hamish. First of all, Bryan, do you have anything to respond to that? Do you want to talk about Western versus non-Western views of sportsmanship and rules compliance?
Well, I think Hamish's piece is absolutely spot on. But of course, not everyone is descendant of that ethos. And there are many people around the world of different nations who have rather different ideas. One of them is, well, it's okay to cheat provided you don't get caught. And what you've got to try and do is to cheat if you can, get away with it, but don't get caught. And I've come across many times in sailing where the person did get caught, but they didn't feel guilty about it. They get punished. And my attitude to this over the years is that one should have a system whereby the chances of getting caught are as great as possible. And that takes race officials to look into things readily, not turn a blind eye, look away and so on, but look into them and then bring them to account, because that would put off the people who are prepared to cheat more. If they think that they're going to get caught and then that the penalty is substantially high compared to what they would have gained, those two things, the risk-reward.
Risk-reward. So what we're talking about is Crime and Punishment, the famous, book. It's not the severity of the punishment; it's the high percentage of getting caught.
Yes, absolutely. Well, not only that, you've got to have a reasonably high punishment. Otherwise, it would be worth the risk.
Yeah,
they'd say, okay, I might get caught, but I won't get penalised. I'll only lose that one race, for example, in sailing. But the point is about this philosophy. If you apply it, it applies both equally to people who have that idea and the gentlemen who wouldn't do it. You see, and you want a level playing field. That's why it's so important. As I put in a report I did years ago about cheating and bad behavior, it's very important that race officials jump on all these things. They don't have to jump heavily on them. I mean, certainly when you're dealing with youngsters, you've just got to have a hearing, not a hearing, a meeting, what I call an interview. And you can put them straight and tell them what a terrible life that will be for them if they don't change their ways. And young people will change their ways, especially if you can do it through the coaches.
I remember an incident when you and I first met, God forbid, not God forbid, bloody hell, almost 40 years ago. You and I, Ken Ryan, the late, great Ken Ryan, may he rest in peace, we were at a Laser Worlds in Sardinia, or was it a Youth Worlds? I can't remember. And there was an incident, some sailor didn't wear their PFD, their life jacket, and they came to, and they were protested, or there was an inquiry, I don't remember now, and the sailor came, we were having the hearing, and he said, oh, well, my life jacket was broken, and I couldn't put it on, so that's why I didn't, it was not a death trap, but it was risky to wear it, I could get hurt or injured, so I just put it in the bottom of the boat. And Ken Ryan said, well, or one of us said, I can't remember, said, well, would you go get the jacket from the boat? And Ken Ryan wisely followed the kid to the boat. And when Ken got there, he didn't decide until after the kid left. Ken Ryan went there, followed the kid, and he arrived about 30 seconds after the kid had gotten to the boat. And some sailor came over and said, hey, do you want to know how that happened? I just saw him rip the life jacket in half. Bryan, do you remember that?
Vaguely. I thought the incident you're going to bring up was the guy who had an incident in front of the start line, And in that incident, he was found guilty, so he would be retired. But then he sailed off behind the committee boat and hit the committee boat. And when asked about that, he denied it. And that was a question of lying. And it took a while, if you remember, to bring the whole jury around. I think we had a jury of 10 people.
I do remember that.
Yeah, and a lot of people didn't want to proceed because he's already retired. I said, oh, yeah, but this is not just an incident. This is lying in a hearing. So we found him guilty. We threw him out the whole regatta. We put up the notice on the notice board saying he'd been thrown out for lying. And that got a lot of people, talking about it, which Jeff Martin, the Laser King, said was terrific because that would stop people lying in the future. Because my view is that to lie in a hearing is a pretty bad sin, because it's not just a question of saying something you saw from a different angle. To actually say something which is untrue distorts the whole judicial system. Anyway, we found out in the end that his coach had told him to lie. So he actually didn't feel too bad about it, because he just told his mates, well, the coach told me to do it and I did it. And now I've got thrown out the whole regatta. And, I think the coach was fired later. But
he was. That's, in fact, I remember. That's right. Hamish, there's a picture that I'll come back to in a second. Because we want to talk about vis-a-vis match racing. Hamish, what's your view on somebody? Now, you're usually a rules advisor. If you're taking somebody in, like New York Yacht Club 1980, one of your charges into the America's Cup jury when they were accused of lying, if I remember well, by a team I was on, and that's when you and I met.
Well, certainly any lawyer ethically, you can't lie on behalf of your client. If the client says, look, I hit the boat, you can't go in there and allow your client to say he didn't hit the boat. And indeed, I mean, if the client insisted in lying, having told you he was intending to lie, the appropriate, of course, as a lawyer is to withdraw from appearing. Saying I'm unable to continue representing this particular client.
Exactly.
And certainly that's what I would do. And you're compelled to do it ethically. And I'd probably lose my ticket if you were found to aid and abet lying in any forum, whether it's a court or a tribunal or indeed a sailing jury.
Of course.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to pick up one thing that Bryan had said, is that there is a conflict between your obligation and, I guess, the gentlemanly sportsmanship conduct. On one hand, you're required to make sure everyone complies with the rules and protest where it's appropriate. But on the other hand, you don't want to be seen as that guy in the corner of the yacht club that protests everybody and forces all these hearings. And, so there is a bit of a tension, if you like, between an obligation to make sure that the rules are followed and people are educated, at the same time being that sort of, I'm trying to think of the expression, that farmyard lawyer or sea lawyer who's constantly protesting everybody all the place.
Yeah, but Hamish, let me say this, Hamish. I'm not suggesting that any of us be the man in the corner. I'm only talking about people who cheat, not just incident. As I told you, if I saw an incident on the water, I'd say, well, it seems quite obvious that A is right and B is wrong. But if A doesn't mind, he doesn't protest, then I'm certainly not going to interfere. Now, a lot of judges don't think that's right. And in fact, Jeff Martin didn't like it. He wanted the jury to go in there and start protesting people on the water. And I said, well, I won't do it.
But let me interrupt there, Bryan. And that's a good point, because different classes have different cultures.
Yes.
And I think it's important. You and I decided this a long, long time ago and have advised ourselves and others, again, better part of 40 years ago. What you do at a Windsurfer Worlds might be different than what you do at a Hobie Worlds, might be different than what you do at the America's Cup or the Sydney Hobart or so on. So, I mean, it's a little different depending upon the class culture and also what the class wants. Jeff Martin, the late, great, longtime president of the laser class, wanted us to enforce the rules because the class was out of control. And his perception was that if we enforced the rules as the jury, that the class would be stronger, more people would want to sail, because he perceived that people were leaving the class because there was rampant abuse of the rules. And Clark Chapin, I just want to interject one other point
Tom.
here, and then I'll come back. Clark Chapin saying, and this is why the rules now include responsibilities for support people as well.
Yeah.
Hamish, Bryan?
Yeah. Yes, one point I would like to make is that I perceive, and certainly this part of the world, there's a certain amount of hand-wringing on the part of competitors and officials and yacht club juries to not really encourage people to protest. And there's a balance to be achieved here, but sometimes I do feel that and I'll give an example of this. I was involved in a yacht race a few months ago where it was involved where one boat failed to take a fairway mark and clearly had not completed the course. Now, some yachts informed the yacht club of this, expecting that the yacht club would then call the boat concerned and suggest that they might want to consider retiring. And the attitude of the person was similar to what Bryan said earlier, was, well, no one's protested, I'm going to go and claim first prize. And the reaction of the yacht club was, well, we don't want to get involved in a protest. It's sort of all a bit nasty and we don't want to be part of it. So the reaction of all the other competitors, was to withdraw from the race. And so essentially they just left the winning boat as the only competitor in the race. And I think that the competitor then got the message from everybody else and did eventually withdraw. And I use that as an example of perhaps.
Hamish, this was that recent incident that you all were talking about, right? And didn't the guy ultimately withdraw? What happened?
He did ultimately withdraw, but only after all the other competitors in the race withdrew, expressing their displeasure with the boat that wouldn't withdraw, having not completed the course. And in my view, the yacht club ought to have been a lot more proactive in recognizing a boat that did not complete the course. They ought to have then acted and withdrawn the boat.
No, I tell you, this is a very good example. And this is what I mean by officials and the club intervening in those sort of situations. And what would they do? They'd bring him in. They don't need a protest. They bring him in and they say to him, did you sail the course? Did you? And he will probably say, if he's astute, he'll say, well, is this a hearing? I mean, what am I doing? Why am I answering these questions here? And the answer, and this is the whole key, is we are investigating whether or not to open a Rule 69. And he says, oh, in that case, yeah, okay, I didn't sail the course. So, and so say, okay, what are you going to do about it? Because you're required, as soon as you know it, you might not have known it on the water. When you got back and all the other competitors say, hey, you left out that fairway mark, then you know it. And at that moment, you are required to take a penalty by the fundamental rule. And you didn't do that. So it's a pretty serious matter. So would you like to do it now? And he'll say, yeah, okay, I'll do it now. And that's resolved. And you haven't even had a hearing. It's brilliant.
Good point.
Yeah.
Now, all this stuff that we are talking about, gentlemen and lady, as all of us here in the room, this is talking about yacht racing, the normal fleet racing rules. We're not talking about team racing, and we're for sure not, Bryan, talking about umpiring. And you made that point because here is the first group of umpires at a formal event ever. There was a little informal umpiring that went on before this, but this was the 1988 Congressional Cup. Bloody hell, 35 years ago. And I'd known Bryan probably for 5 years by then, since the early 80s. And we'd done a fair bit of judging and umpiring together, or not umpiring, judging together. And you can see in this group of the late great Cy Gillette, Robbie Haynes. I had chosen this. I was chair of this group. It was my turn to chair the Congressional Cup umpiring jury team. And I said, well, I'll do it if you'll let us umpire. Bob Fisher, the late great Bob Fisher. I wanted a journalist. He's also a superb sailor, former world champion in the fireball class and others. Bryan, of course. Dick Deaver, Gerardo Seeliger, and of course the winner was Peter Gilmore from Australia. Joran Peterson, former president. I think he was technically the jury chairman, or I was the chief. I can't remember how it all worked, but that was the gang that first umpired, Bryan. And umpiring has come a long way since we did it in 1988. And when we did it, and I gave the paper at World Sailing and said, what do we do now? I said, whatever you do, here's what we did. This is what we did at the Maxi Worlds. This is what we did at Congressional Cup. It was a big judges thing, and it was the end of the day, and I thought nobody would come in. Well, the whole room filled up with the other committees that were adjourning and came in, and the room was packed. And I kept saying, don't try this at home. This is an experiment. We don't know this is going to work. Now it's done in the Olympics. For the medal races, it's done in team racing. It's done in all the professional circuits because people want instant decisions without appeal. And that's quite a different system, isn't it, Bryan?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I remember you chaired that. You were the chief umpire, shall we say, at the Congressional Cup, and you paired us all off, and you said, I don't think you told us how to do it, but with my partner, who I can see there, but I can't remember his name, the guy right on the left top. What was his name?
He's long gone. His name was. He's a retired police officer from Toledo, Ohio. Fuller.
Yeah.
Hell of a nice guy.
Fuller. Now, he was my partner, and we all decided we'd like to stick with the same partner. And what we did is we each adopted a boat. So I'd say, okay, well, you do that one, I'll adopt this one. And we'll both speak over each other if necessary. And that then we will know who's done something wrong and broken a rule at the time. Now, when we got back, to my surprise, everybody else had done it a different way. Some people, like Pete Ives, he just said, no, I'll just keep quiet and we'll talk about it later. And everyone had different ideas. And then you commanded us to each try each other's ideas to make sure that, we're on the right track. Well, I did try other ideas, but I stuck with each of us adopting a boat. And that, of course, I did chair the working party with you and Joran, which developed the rules for, because, at that time, there was no rules to allow it. Anyone could have protested. But, then we wrote the appendix and so on. And we wrote the method. And the method was that each of you adopt a boat and talk through it that way.
Well, Bryan and Tom, just quick question. So what changes to your obligations? What, in terms of sportsmanship, when you're match racing, what changes are there in your obligations, for example, if you break a rule?
Yeah, very, very good point. And this has been developed over the years. It wasn't all done instantly. I didn't know what I was doing. I used to interview all the top skippers. They'd always come in afterwards and want to hear all the decisions. And it was great because we said what we thought we saw. And of course, they said, well, it didn't happen like that at all. It was like this. And therefore, you've made the wrong decision. Well, we haven't necessarily made the wrong decision. We've made the right decision in respect to what we saw, but we might have seen the wrong thing. But the thing is, so one example was hitting a mark. You could hit a mark and the umpire's not paying attention. Should you take a penalty? And what we decided was that it was going to be an umpire-driven, rather like a football match. The referee's in charge.
Exactly.
You can't say, whoops, I'm terribly sorry, I tripped that guy up and I'm a real gentleman. According to Hamish, and therefore I'd like to say I'd like to give the other side a penalty. You can't do that in soccer. Only the referee can do that. And so we thought we'd do the same. And so only the umpires can declare that somebody hit a mark and indeed give them the penalty straight away. So there's no doubt about it. If they don't see it, are they still required to take it? And we said no.
Correct.
Because it's umpire driven. In that respect, they're not allowed to. But I was worried when we get umpiring America's Cup on the TV that all sailors would think, oh, is that how it works? Well, of course, it doesn't work that way in fleet racing. In fleet racing, you are duty bound if you hit a mark to take a penalty.
Well, and the other thing, Bryan, we tried to do is when we did this umpiring thing, and this was the Con Cup was, it was an experiment. It was a live experiment. One of the things we went into that regatta not knowing what the penalty was going to be. And we tried, if you remember, in the practice days, we tried jib drops, we tried 360s. Yeah. And I think it was the late, great Cy Gillette there, third from the left standing up, who came up with the idea of the 270. And then, as you say, I was a hockey referee, and I was kind of in the Pete Ives mode of let's go off and you see an incident and then talk about what we thought, because you're refereeing a hockey game, you make an instant decision, put the guy in the penalty box or not. But your system, and I think John Dewar was also keen on this, was to talk it through as if you were the skippers. You'd each take a boat. And that was brilliant. That was a brilliant development. And it's a bunch of smart people who worked on this from this event on forward. And I remember Ken Ryan and Joran and I drafted that first Appendix C the summer before over on a computer, an old Mac, with a bottle of Bailey's Irish cream.
I always thought I did that. I drafted the first.
We drafted it, the first one, and I'm sure we all shared. By then, to be fair, the guys in Leamington, you guys, others, and the Aussies and the Kiwis even, were drafting stuff and coming up with ideas. We had that big meeting in somewhere, Southampton, I think, and hashed this stuff through. But it has, as Hamish, the great question by Hamish, it has changed the nature of the sport. And we have to remember, umpiring is different because the only thing, we tried to keep it player driven. One of my pretext concepts was that we didn't want the umpires acting unless there was a flag from one of the boats. Yeah. And that's still the case. We didn't want umpires
hitting the mark. Yeah.
Except hitting the mark, and now one ooching, rocking, pumping, or propulsion, one or two other things. But if there's a port starboard, and it looks like it was a bad port starboard, like the blackjack incident, it looks like it was a bad the umpires don't act unless somebody displays a Y flag, unless they invite the umpires in. I think that concept has been good for the sport. But your point again is that umpiring and umpired races are quite different from our normal recreational home club fleet type racing. Anything else on Hamish or Bryan
Tom,
on umpiring?
Tom, it's interesting that we use that soccer example where if you break the rule and the umpire, the umpire doesn't see it, well, it kind of doesn't happen. Whereas, take a sport like cricket, for example, and hence the expression, it isn't cricket, where a batsman, if the umpire feels he's not out, can still walk. And it does happen, even in international cricket these days, where a batsman, even though he hasn't been ruled out by an umpire, feels he's out and walks off the crease. It's rare, but it does happen.
Yeah, well, of course, there's one person on the pitch that knows if it nicked the bat, and that is the batsman.
We've had a couple of other incidents here in professional sports. I think one in the NBA, the basketball, and one even in hockey, where the guy, just the other day, I think in ice hockey, the player went and said, "Excuse me, I deserve the penalty, not the guy it was a tripping penalty, and they just got it wrong." And in any event, sportsmanship is always keen. Let me go to this next incident because everybody's asking about the J105 situation. We'll just wrap this up. If either of you has another comment, 35 years ago this year, 1988, and it was an interesting group, bright group of people. And one other thing that I might say, guys, is that in this context, remember, we talked about the debriefs because we didn't know what the hell we were doing. And we said to the sailors, after we get in it at the end of the day, all come into that room, the glass room, and they're at the end of Long Beach Yacht Club, and we'll have a discussion. And the umpires, not the sailors, the umpires said, "No way, no effing way. We're not going to come in here and put our you-know-whats out on the table for somebody to, the sailors to tell us we were wrong." And I said, "Excuse me," and you backed it up. And I'll tell you who else did, was Bob Fisher. He said, "No, we're going to have open communication. This is the way to do it." And the umpires begrudgingly at first, and then started to have this explanation. And we found out very quickly that rather than it causing more angst, causing more turmoil, it relaxed the atmosphere at the regattas. And now you go to a modern match racing event, the umpires and the sailors, the players are talking to each other, and they're happy to talk on the water and explain incidents. It's entirely more relaxed and friendly now in most cases. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. There were one or two people in that group who said that if I have to come in and face the competitors, I want to just make the decision on the water, and that's the end to it. And if I have to come in and explain myself, I'm not going to be an umpire. Well, when we developed the rules, I said, well, if that's going to be your attitude, I'm afraid you're not going to be an umpire. So they did change. I mean, I'm not going to say who they were, but they changed, and they got on board with the system. And as you quite rightly say, those meetings, which, by the way, I mean, that your club was the first, but there were others all around the world. Obviously, there was the World Match Racing Congress. They really, the relationship between the umpires and the skippers became very, very close and very important. And sometimes we said, well, look, now you've explained it, I think we've made a mistake. And of course, they like that when we've made a mistake.
Well, exactly. One, and Hamish, a question for you too. Of late, at the club level, this mediation system starts to happen more and more. Clark Chapin's on here. He knows a lot about this, conducts these mediations. And it's sort of akin to what you were talking about, Bryan, in the case with Hamish, where if you know there's been a problem, you call the guy in and say, hey, here's a problem. Are you aware of it? Well, is this a hearing? Well, not necessarily. We're trying. But that's sort of a mediation as well. But how about the formal mediations that now go on under the rules?
Look, I like the idea. I like the idea of an informal one, at least at a club level, anyway, because I think it's educative. And a lot of people come into the sport potentially without much history. They may not have a coach or haven't really been coached, and they do need to be educated. I mean, they may watch sailing on the TV, whether it's Sail GP or whether it's the America's Cup or something. And that's an entirely different level, as you touched on. So it can be match racing, and their obligations are quite different. And I think in all sports, all participants at a young age do need to be educated in terms of what the expectations are. And part of that may be you might be in your 50s or 60s and participating in the sport on and off for a long time, and still need a reminder sometimes that what actually is required.
Hamish, Julia, do you know the real reason we started umpiring? And I wrote this up in a long 2-part article, actually, in Seahorse many years ago. The guy there on the right in this photo and the guy who won that 88 Congressional Cup are the reason, really, that umpiring got started. Right, Bryan?
Well, you're referring to Peter Gilmore?
And yourself.
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, just a quick background. When I joined the Swedish team in 1980, and I put these ideas to Pelle Pedersen, he was absolutely horrified. He says, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try and race faster than the other guy. So I didn't get involved anymore. They had one protest that year in 1980. And when I went into the protest room and saw the evidence, I said, I'd like to retire on behalf of Sverige. And I think the chairman, an American guy, said, well, I don't think you can retire.
You could.
You've got to go ahead with it. I said, in that case, I offer no evidence. And he said, oh, yeah, you can do that. And of course, we were disqualified. But that did my reputation some good, because everyone knew I was not prepared to do, we're not prepared to stand up for my team if I thought they were wrong. Anyway, when I got to, then the next, I was with the British team, and they were all arguing amongst themselves, the skippers, so they weren't that interested. Then I got to Kookaburra, and I put it to Ian Murray, and he said, well, you'll have to speak to Peter Gilmore, because he's going to be the starting skipper probably, and he was skippering one of the 2 boats. And when I talked to him, he said, do you mean to say that I can win a race before the start? And it doesn't matter who actually wins across the finishing line, that I can win it at that point. I said, absolutely. This is a boxing match. It's not a running race. And he said, I'm going to give you half an hour every day. And it was marvelous. I had all these scenarios. And the best one was we're coming up underneath the other boat before the start. And the rule was you couldn't luff quickly before the starting signal. I mean, obviously the rules have changed now, but it said nothing about bearing away. So you crept up underneath them. And then when you were in exactly the right position and you were going quite slowly, you bore away violently and swung your stern round straight into their port quarter. And I remember I had cameras on board, and all the cameras went as the boat shook. And of course, they protested. And even somebody on their jury, if you remember Graham Owens, wasn't it, said, yeah, well, you shouldn't be bearing away quickly. And I said, where does it say that in the rules? And they said, well, it doesn't actually say it, but it's what they meant. and Graham said, don't worry. He said, we will follow the rules. And obviously we won that protest.
Yeah, that was the John.
Bryan, So, Bryan, you're responsible therefore for that long America's Cup Defender series in Fremantle, were you, where they spent just about every night in the protest room?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there wasn't hardly a race where we didn't protest. And if we won it, we had a protest ready, but I'd ring Warren Jones and say, "Are you protesting?" He'd say, "Yes, we're I said, "Well, okay, in that case, we're protesting as well." So there was hosts of protests. And I realized at the end of that series that is not the way that we go ahead with this sport, because everyone was totally upset with all these protests. And then I was delighted to chair the working party to develop umpiring. And on that working party, of course, was Joran and Tom. But I did all the work, and they just.
Julia, do you believe that?
Of course.
Bloody hell!
Of course I do.
Okay, so, but back to that was '87 in Perth, and that's exactly what happened. Is that Graham? I guess he's left us, right? The late great Graham Owen, and
he's still alive, but
alive
he
and
doesn't do anything for the sport.
Well, he chaired the race committee. He also chaired the jury and heard the protests at night, the poor guy. And you guys started this protest fest. We as the challengers were delighted to see this. We just thought this was wonderful. But it was a disaster because you were in the protest room, a disaster for the defenders, every night, wearing down everybody. Finally, and Joran was there, and finally I called a dinner, and you were mad at me, Bryan. I'll never forget this. I called a dinner at one of those 2 Italian restaurants. Remember the 2 Italian teams brought bespoke? Yeah. They brought their own chefs. They set up competing restaurants. Italia, the Yacht Club Italiano team, and also the other team was the Yacht Club Costa Smeralda. They set up their own competing Italian restaurant. They were the 2 best restaurants in Perth and Fremantle by far. So I got us a reservation there. All the umpires and the rules advisors. Hamish, you would have loved this. This was before your time by a little bit, not much. And we went over there, broke bread, and drank too much wine. And I said, this is no way to run a railroad or a sport. I'm a hockey referee. Joran Peterson's a hockey referee. We got to be able to follow the races, blow whistles, do something. And out of that dinner, which was a hugely expensive dinner, to be fair, but it was a great dinner. Come on, Bryan. It was a great dinner. Out of that came the notion that there had to be a better way. Right?
Okay, well, I'll give you the credit for that, because you did bring the proposal to ISAF, or IYU, whatever it was then. Yeah, I've always given you credit for that, Tom.
Well, I'm not looking for credit. I'm just glad that we did it. And there were a lot of key people, not just you, myself, and Joran, but others. John Doerr and others, Josha de Havilland, Josha.
No, they came in a lot later. The other credit I'd give is to all the skippers, to be honest.
Exactly right. And starting with Peter Gilmore, Ed Baird, Peter Eisler, those guys were all key. And that other.
I'll tell you something that happened at the first Worlds, the first match racing Worlds, which was umpire, is that Chris Dixon swore at the umpires violently and threw his flag in the water. And on the receiving end was Cy Gillette. I mean, one of the nicest people you could imagine. And Cy said to me, he reported it to me, and he said, this is how it's going to be in the future, because everyone knew it was the beginning of something good. He said, I'm not going to be an umpire. I'm not going to be sworn at like that, and especially if there's cameras and things on. So I had to think about it. And at the end of the day, I had a meeting and I shut the press out. I only allowed the umpires and the skippers. And I said, we've got to resolve what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. So we thought throwing your flag into the water, and that's okay. You might be done for throwing garbage in the water, but that's okay as far as we're concerned. If you want to thump on the deck in frustration, that's okay too. But you can't swear directly at an umpire. You can tell us later on that we made a mistake, but you can't swear like that. That'd be bringing the sport to disrepute. And Chris Dixon said, "Oh, I know what this is about." He said, "This is about the incident with me." And I said, "Well, it is." He said, fair enough." He said, "No, those are good rules." And we wrote them all down, and we've pretty well stuck to them ever since.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Hamish, one other story, and then we move on to this J105 incident. Several of you have asked. The notion of letting the media into a jury hearing. Now, we're not talking about umpiring anymore, but we still have juries at regattas, even the America's Cup, where you have umpires deciding the boat-to-boat stuff on the water. But Bryan, you were very keen, and Hamish and I supported you on this of letting the media in, letting the other teams send a representative in.
Yeah.
And then laterally, I think they've been letting a press representative come in and then write it up, which was, it just cut down on the madness inside the room and distraction and so on. But you pushed that. I remember that. Hamish and I supported you. Hamish showed up on the scene in 2000 in his suit.
Yeah.
Beautiful suit. Just come from the law office of Bell Gully in Auckland, and he came to his first jury hearing, and I'd just flown down there. KR had called me up, and I got down there seeing, I knew you and most of the other people, but then this guy shows up in a Seville, it was a beautiful suit from Bell Gully, and he's in there, and somebody quickly said, Hamish, take off. He was representing New York Yacht Club, for God's sakes. Take off your suit coat and put on this team jacket. I remember that.
No, I don't. I think about. I laid down certain changes, and one was the minor one was that we would stop wearing jackets and ties in the jury hearing, which Joran had introduced because he's hot on that sort of thing. And I remember ringing Joran and telling him that I was going to abandon the dress code. And he said, "Oh, Bryan," he said, "you'll lose all the respect of everybody." And I so it was with some trepidation. And then when Hamish marched in his suit, I thought, "Oh my God, he's trying to make some point." But he wasn't. He'd just come from his office. And then the other thing was to allow everyone to bring in. I think I allowed 2 people from each thing. And again, Joran said, "Well, he said the whole thing will collapse. People won't respect you." And nothing was further from the truth. I mean, Joran's a wonderful guy, and I've followed him on many things. But on this question, everyone, I remember you were there, Tom, and everyone respected it. No one spoke out of turn or anything like that, because you were so grateful at being there and listening to the evidence and so on. And sometimes I'd turn to you and say, would anyone like to make a submission on this? Because it was relevant to all the teams. That's the whole point. Yeah, they were good times. Yeah.
And smart.
Yes, I was eventually issued a polo shirt by Young America, so I did manage to turn up the subsequent hearings, at least in my suit trousers and a polo shirt.
Okay, let me push us on to this next incident. Everybody's asking about it. It just came out in the press here in the U.S. I told you all about it yesterday. There's this a J105 class, which is a very good class here in this country, and a boat racing here in the big boat series, the Rolex big boat series, been going on here, I think, since what, Julia, 65 or so at St. Francis. And
85.
No, 60.
Oh, 64.
Yeah. And as a result of an incident here at the 2022 Rolex big boat series, a yacht called Nene, or how do you pronounce that?
Nene.
Nene, it's the Hawaiian bird. And he, a former North American champion in the class, was after the hearing was kicked out of the event, was scored DNE for all the races. And yesterday the class issued this statement. The J105 class executive committee met on January 9th, 4 days ago, and voted to suspend the class membership of Timothy Russell for the 2023 calendar year. The incident involved how Russell and a guy, one of his crew guys, boarded a competing boat at the docks at St. Francis, the J105 Maverick, one of their arch rivals, at 8:57 p.m. on September 17th, which was during the regatta, and tampered with the boat's lifelines. And I've heard informally that they loosens the lifelines, and all these classes have a limit on how much the lifelines can be loose, so that people, when they're drop hiking over the side, can only go so far. It's a safety issue, but it's also a comfort issue. And they had apparently loosened I'm not 100% sure, loosened the lifelines with the intention then of protesting them the next day for having demonstrably loose, you're smiling, demonstrably too loose lifelines. In any event, video from cameras on the St. Francis Yacht Club docks and the front door was provided as evidence. Apparently these guys didn't realize that the crime problem in a lot of places in the world today, it's not quite Monaco with all the police cameras, but here there's a lot of cameras here in the marina and in the parking lot at St. Francis and so on, and down on the docks. And these guys were seen to be going down there and tampering with this other boat. So the question is, in the matter of Nene, That is now a Rule 69 matter that is before U.S. Sailing. The jury reported it to U.S. Sailing under Rule 69, and the class has acted ahead of U.S. Sailing and has suspended under their rules the not the boat, but the owner of the boat, the class membership of the gentleman who owns the boat. And gentlemen, how do you comment? What's your reaction to all of this, and how should U.S. knowing what you know, what I've said, assuming it's true, what will or should U.S. Sailing do?
Well, the jury for the event has only jurisdiction over that event, so they don't have any power to ban him from other events.
Correct.
But obviously, the class, anyone can exclude anybody, a judicial body can exclude anybody for as long as they like, because and that's what has happened. So that's absolutely fine, and I'm very, very pleased to see that sort of action. Then it will go to U.S. Sailing, and then it will go to World Sailing, and each will make a decision as to what to do about it. I mean, that is real cheating. I can't believe it. Yeah.
So what should Hamish?
My view, Tom, is very much the same. Based on what you've told us, that clearly the right result appears to be going through the system. But I guess at the time it must have been a good thing to do after about a dozen Heinekens.
What should U.S. Sailing do?
Well, good point. And I mean, one shouldn't make these sort of comments, but it sounds to me as if that seems to be about the right penalty, assuming that they were plastered, or what do you call it, drunk, or had too much to drink, and it was a prank or something like that. If it was a real,
does that make a difference, Bryan, if there's alcohol involved or not? Why does that make a difference?
Well, it doesn't make a bit difference from the point of view of being guilty and penalizing. But I mean, I tell you what does make a difference when these sort of things happen. If the perpetrator is very, very sorry, and he's got some excuse, I don't know what it could be, and also if the injured party accepts the apology and so on, that does have some effect, I think, on the penalty, not the guilty fine, but the penalty. Yeah, in my opinion, anyway.
Julia, do you have a reaction to all this?
John Emmett says, I know a young talented sailor who had two-year ban, was a drunken incident, and he never came back to the sport.
Well, that happens.
Yeah.
And maybe we don't want that person back in the sport.
Yeah.
Peter Taylor, Baton Rouge, Baton Cannon down in Charleston. I know of someone being banned by U.S. Sailing, lifetime ban of from sanctioned sailing events. Clark Chapin saying the U.S. Sailing Review Board can take several actions, but the J105 class can only exclude this person, correct, from their events. Yeah, correct.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
And James Frederick Bland down in Austin, Texas, who's a keen sailor and a real fozy on here almost every show. He's saying alcohol should not make a difference. Safety, sportsmanship is important. Indeed. I think Ed Worley is the excuse. I am sorry that I was caught. Greg Phillips down in Australia is saying throw the book at him. Yeah, I think we all are pretty much of the same mind. What about in general, rules compliance, sportsmanship? Is the sport getting better? Is it getting worse? I mean, we look at the America's Cup, and Hamish, you were talking about the Victorian era and how good sport, the amateur Corinthian attitude that came out of the Victorian era. The America's Cup was pretty brutal from day one.
Well, it is, and but I think that there was a difference between the owners of the boats who are very much in that Victorian gentleman tradition, and some of the professional crews that are there. And as I touched on earlier, there is a conflict between amateurism and professionalism in terms of the approach to sport. And, often it's a conflict that's difficult to resolve.
I want to mention a Admiral's Cup boat that had built the boat with pumps and tanks. And every time they tacked, somebody went down below and did some pumping, and then the boat came upright. And so, I mean, obviously that's cheating to a large degree, but they were caught. So then I remember with Mary Pira, we had a jury hearing, And one very important thing we decided was, I mean, we listened to the boat captain who installed it. It's really quite an intriguing system, but obviously totally illegal. And various other people knew about it. So they all got penalized. But the person we penalized most, and this is most important, is the owner. Because otherwise you'd get owners saying to a skipper, look, I want you to win such and such an event. And I don't care how you do it. Don't tell me how you do it. But if you win it, I'll give you $1 million.
Yeah.
And you don't want that. They've got to take responsibility. So they could say to their skipper that they're going to hire, I want you to win it and I'll give you $1 million, but for heaven's sake, don't cheat, because I get the major penalty.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
just going to that lifeline example, I mean, there is a tale of two boats sailing, and as they tack, one boat throws a couple of screws and nuts into the mainsail of the other, which naturally fall to the deck, and of course it then causes the recipient boat to sail very gingerly, feeling their mast might be coming down at any moment. I mean, that's an incident that one would have thought was lacking in sportsmanship, even though it was tinged with a bit of humour.
Well, it depends obviously entirely on the situation. If you're out practicing and one thing, but during a race you do. I think somebody's just made the point here. You never, Ken Saban in Toledo, Ohio, who's a bit of an old curmudgeon, but a great sailor, ice boater, long time, and he's almost always on here watching. And he says, you never, in caps, you never, ever do anything to a competitor's boat. Lifelines. I mean, we know during the America's Cup, people have tried to saw through, or mostly through, shrouds of other boats, hoping the rig would come down. They got caught, nothing happened. Nothing.
In what event, Tom?
I'm not going to say.
No, but okay.
An America's Cup trials event.
Ah, okay.
And the stuff that goes on, but we have to, I think, as a sport, this kind of discussion happens, in my opinion, far too rarely. We need to have this kind of discussion, and Dave Perry is really good with the kids, and we need to start at the kid level, right up through the club level. And the clubs need to be aware. Somebody asked here on the questions if the gentleman here, this guy, Mr. Russell, is a member of St. Francis, Timothy Russell. I don't believe he is, but I think he's a member of San Francisco Yacht Club over on the other side of the bay. But, I mean, this stuff can't be tolerated. It's going through the normal and correct process, and I think the clubs are probably waiting to see what U.S. Sailing does, and maybe even World Sailing, because as you say, Bryan, this gets reported to World Sailing, right?
Yeah. There was a case in 1984. That was Los Angeles, wasn't it? So that was Long Beach.
Yes.
And there was one of the soling entries. I can't remember which country. It was the first time they'd introduced a swing test, which shows you where the center of gravity is, or at least where the weight is established. And obviously it pays you to put the weight in the middle.
Yes.
And they had built the boat with the weight in the middle and then no weight at the outside. So it didn't have to have any corrective weights. And basically all the corrective weights were in the middle. Whereas if you had to put in corrective weights, they would not be in the middle. And so they did the swing test and it failed. And the jury, I was a very junior member of the jury, but I said, well, that country cannot enter a boat. The boat they've entered has failed in a big way that can't be corrected. I mean, there's some things that can be corrected at measurement, but that can't be corrected. It's built into the boat. But I was overruled. I've forgotten whether it was Yoran or whoever it was, but they said, no, we'll let them go and get a legal boat and put it in. Well, I mean, to me, that's outrageous. That means you can try to get an illegal boat through, and if you fail, you've got another one standing by it to put in instead. But anyway, I lost that one because they allowed it.
Yeah, well, that was a different era. I was secretary for that jury. If you remember, we had the first three panel Olympic jury. That was a bit of a three-ring circus, and you had I remember the chair of the jury. He's long gone. I won't mention his name, but they were not risk averse. They didn't want any shit fights. They didn't want any controversy. They were controversy averse. I think the Finn class has been doing the so-called Lambelet test since forever. James Bland is on here. He will know, being a big Finn sailor. And yeah, the Soling started doing it, and Emmett's heard John saying that we have been doing that with all the new ILCA builders, the Lamb-Belay tests. And of course, the Etchells class has had a problem with their Australian build down there of a particular group of Etchells. But we can go on and on. Somehow we need as a sport to continue to promote and encourage sportsmanship at all levels. And I agree with you, Bryan. Not everybody has your skill, Bryan, to go in. And I've seen you do it any number of times. I'd like to think I've done it. Henry Menon's pretty good at it. There are other jury members, jury chairs who've done it. I mean, I had to go through some wild stuff at Far 40 Worlds with people, including Ernesto, Hamish, your former boss, who objected to the class that I was chairing the jury when I was with Oracle. And the class said, we don't care if he's with Oracle or not. We want good judges. And, that, he calmed down after that. But, you got to talk about it and sort it out. And you got to somehow
Tom,
encourage this.
Now, one thing I'd like to say is one mustn't get confused between sportsmanship and people competing to the very limit of the rules.
Correct.
I mean, sometimes people think, well, I can do this and it's just within the rules. I won't tell anybody because they'll probably change the rule. And to me, that's okay. It's up to the rule makers to set the limits. Yeah, okay.
Hamish,
Just
final word to you.
I think it's very educative, and we should just touch on where we got a minute or so on some of the cases that are there on sportsmanship. For example, I mean, a classic one, of course, is people calling starboard when they're on port to try and bully, if you like, another competitor.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And my understanding is that there's a case saying that actually does break rule 2. What's your comment, Bryan?
Well, there was a case. It was very strange. I don't know whether I should speak about this in this way, but King Olaf was a member of the Racing Rules Committee. And this came up as a proposed case for ISAF. And there was quite a discussion around the room. And some people said, oh, come on, that's not breaking the rule. I mean, in team racing, we do that all the time. You shout things to put the other side off. And stuff.
Yeah.
But I put the case up. No, if this was a beginner, and he'd got it wrong, it's absolutely not cheating. He's just made a silly mistake. And he would not be penalized at all. It's up to the other guy to realize who's on port and who's on starboard. But this was an experienced person who was showing off afterwards because the other kid who'd been on starboard tacked because he'd shouted starboard at him to get him to tack. And he was showing off around the clubhouse about this. And the committee, good on them, they held a hearing and threw him out the race. And he appealed through the RYA. And of course, that is the end of the matter, the RYA, because World Sailing do not handle appeals. But Julia, it could go up as a case. So it came up as being discussed as a case.
Julia, you would agree that intent is important, but we try to frame the rules, and everything we do, we try to keep intent out of it because it's so hard to know. But in something like this, clearly intent on a Rule 69 incident sportsmanship issue is quite important.
Yes, but you have it's difficult to decide that many times.
It is for sure. Final words on all this. I just want you to know there's a lot of thumbs up and a lot of stars and nice comments. Thank you, Stingray. Clark Chapin saying, I first encountered Bryan Willis at the Chicago Yacht Club in March of 1989 in a seminar on the new rules with the late, great Bill Benson. I was impressed then, and I remain impressed now. Ken Saban says there's no amateurs in this in $1 million sport. Yeah. Julia, this is a good time for you to remind everybody about the comments and going back.
Yes. Yeah. It's frustrating because almost every comment is interesting, and I would say go back and look at them. I got stuck on this one, which says all 3 of the guys in this discussion have encyclopedic brains and memories. I'm so impressed.
Yeah, you should you should see us after we've had a couple of beers.
Yeah.
Or in my case, red wine, or we now drink. We've switched to tequila soda, Bryan. You're not a big drinker, I know, but we switched to tequila soda because it's the lowest glycemic drink, the lowest sugar apparently, even lower than champagne, lower than vodka. So we drink tequila soda, and that's how we're staying reasonably fit and thin. I mean, reasonably.
Reasonably.
Okay, thank you for that kind comment, Alistair Murray and Peter Taylor and Stingray and so on. Peter Taylor saying, yep, it deserves a couple of tequilas. I want to press on to one other topic. You gentlemen didn't know we were going to talk about, but I want to bring it up now because I think you've got an anecdote, Bryan, as well. The late great, he passed away this week. You mentioned King Olaf, who was the first president of honor of what was then IYRU, and then his son, King Harold and King Constantine, were co-presidents of honor for a long, long time. And His Majesty passed away this week, 1940 to 2023. And World Sailing has celebrated his life and is mourning his passing, as is the IOC. He was a member of the IOC after he won a gold medal in 1960, and then was a member and then an honorary member after that. I remember him from the Stad Yacht Club because when we founded that club, which we're going to celebrate the 25th year of that club this year. I just got the notice before we went to air. And one of my jobs was to recruit the Royals as honorary members. And not only did His Majesty King Constantine want to become a member because he skis in Stad, he spends his winter holidays, or did, there with his family. He wanted to be the honorary commodore or the patron. He wanted to go around the world and support Stad Yacht Club. When we founded it, the idea really was that it would be, we're going to have a ski event, and maybe we have that ski yachting competition every year now. But he said, no, this is going to be a cool yacht club. We may even want to be able to challenge for the America's Cup, he said. So we have an annual regatta on an arm of the sea, and today the club sent out a very nice notice. I'm going to read part of it. On Wednesday the 11th, we received the sad news that our patron, H.M. King Constantine, has made his last voyage at the age of 82. In 64, he married the then 18-year-old Danish Princess Anne Marie, and the ceremony in Athens was televised in many countries. King Constantine became Prince William's godfather. By the way, I told you guys yesterday, he's well, I won't say it. He's big on Prince William. He was never big on. He was a buddy of Charles, but he wasn't.
Yeah.
He wasn't big on the other one. In constant contact and constant discussion these days. King Constantine became Prince William's godfather, demonstrating good relations and strong ties with the British royal family. He was particularly close to Her Majesty the Queen, the late great. As a GYC member from almost the very beginning, he was a tireless ambassador for the idea and values of our club. Wherever he traveled, he had the Burgee in his luggage, promoting international exchange and the ever-growing network of clubs, partners, and friends. That is so true. The Stad Yacht Club is grateful and at the same time honored for everything our patron did and represented to our club and to the sport. He was indeed a keen sailor. He had a good coach in the person of the late great Dane, the Great Dane, Paul Elstrom, who coached him in his Olympic effort. And in 1960, he sailed in the Rome Olympics, which were held in Naples on Naples Bay in the Dragon class, and he indeed did win the gold medal, which was a big deal for Greece. It was a big deal for a lot of different countries to see him do that. And Bryan, I think you have an anecdote about His Majesty.
Well, no, he was, when I put to the executive at an annual conference the idea that I should conduct a survey on cheating and bad behavior in the sport of sailing, I wanted to get I wanted to be commissioned by the executive. And so I appeared before the executive with the idea. But he was most supportive. He asked the most questions about what I was going to do. And in the end, he was very, very supportive. And therefore, I got my commission. So that's the best story I can come up with for him. But yeah, he's a great character.
Well, I'll remind you.
I'll
remind you.
Sorry?
I'll remind you about people. A lot of people on here don't know that Bryan's not only a member of the America's Cup Hall of Fame, one of the first judges, rules advisors, maybe the first. Hamish would know. He's very involved with that group, but also has won the Beppe Croce Award, which is the highest service award in our sport. And who presented that, Bryan?
Yes. I see. He obviously asked the exec if he could be the one that told me, and he phoned me and left a message to start with, and then he phoned me again, and I didn't recognize the voice. It wasn't a very good line.
He never used his name. When he would call, he would never use his name. Either you saw it on your phone or didn't, and he would just start talking, and you'd recognize it.
Exactly. So only when I played back his message did I realise what it was. And also, don't forget, I had no idea about the Beppe Croce trophy. I didn't realise that I was going to get it, and therefore it was a complete surprise. So it completely threw me. I had to ring back and apologise to him. Yeah.
Well, bravo Zulu to you for winning both of those awards. And we're going to miss His Majesty. He had a bit of a controversial career as a king, and then he was exiled. He was back and forth. But I knew him later in life when he was living in London, and he was a consummate gentleman and a huge supporter of our sport. I'll tell you one more brief story about him in lieu of some kind of a more of an obit or a commemorative session here. When we were at the Royal Yacht Squadron in 88, 89.
Hamish, he's talking about the Royal Yacht Squadron, okay?
Yes,
the Royal Yacht Squadron. Yeah.
The Royal Yacht Squadron. I've
not some colonial alternative.
This was, not the Royal New Zealand, the Royal Yacht Squadron. And we were having our mid-year meeting of what was then the CPOC. Now it's called the Olympic Committee or the Events Committee. And Gerardo Seeliger and I had just come off this whole 88, 87, 88 America's Cup, and there was a lot of interest in doing match racing in the Olympics. And there was no submission. There was no prior discussion. And at that meeting, he came to Gerardo and myself, Gerardo Seeliger, and he said, we ought to do this match racing in the Olympics. This stuff is cool, and, looks like it's really good, and you got television and so on. Why don't you guys put a motion to the table? And when we come back from lunch or tea or whatever the break was, and I said, Your Majesty, we can't, this will never pass. These guys don't even know what we're talking about, most of them. He said, just do it. Leave it with me. And he went and the then Chairman Jonathan Jansen and had a word with him, and he said, Eamon's going to put this motion, and it's going to be supported by Seeliger. And we were the Young Turks on the CPOC at the time. And without, again, no submission, no prior discussion, no anything, it went to the committee. It went before the committee. He immediately embraced it. His Majesty King Constantine, who was, vice chairman or co-chair or whatever he was on the committee. And he said, this is a capital idea. We should do this immediately. Put match racing in the Olympics. The committee voted unanimously, with one exception, and Herbert Fechner, who was then the mayor of the mayor of East Berlin, who was on that committee, and that could get him out of East Germany, and he got to go off to travel someplace. He didn't know jack what about sailing, let alone being on the Olympic Committee of the World Federation. He voted no or voted absent, or he may have just not voted. But otherwise, the committee voted unanimously. In 4 years or less later, we had match racing in the 92 Olympics in Barcelona.
Yeah.
Thanks to His Majesty King Constantine. Hamish?
So I guess we must have King Pavlos, his eldest son now of Greece, do we?
Well, not really, because the royal family got excused some time ago. He kind of was self-fashioned himself as a continuing royal after the monarchy was excused from further participation, as New York Yacht Club would have said. But remember, his sister's the queen, or was the queen. She's married to Juan Carlos, the Queen of Spain. He was Phil the Greek, as I never called him that to his face, but the late great Prince Philip was Greek and was an uncle or something, or cousin, I can't remember. So enough of all that. His Majesty King Constantine's passed away this week at age 80-something. He was the World Sailing President of Honor. A great guy, terrific supporter of our sport, and may he rest in peace. Okay, I've got one more thing for you guys. I don't know if I warned you about this yesterday in the tech check or not, but I've started a new policy. John Schaefer asked a question of Andrew when he was our guest, Andrew McIrvin, our guest on Tuesday. Terrific show again. I commend that to all of you to go back and have a look at that show number. What was it, Julia? 582. And this is the idea of having a question forward. And Andrew has asked a broad but superb question for the two of you, which is, given a clean sheet, what racing rules would they, the two of you, abolish, change, or introduce?
Interesting question.
Okay, I'll go first if you like. I'll go first. I would like to change for keelboat racing the requirement for a valid protest to have called protest or fly a red flag when the other boat might be 2 miles ahead and has failed to take a mark. I just think it's utterly ridiculous.
Say again? I didn't understand.
So one of the requirements for a valid protest is having called and shouted protest and to fly the code B flag. Now, in a keelboat race, when the boats can be a long distance apart, there could be a lot of noise going on, it just seems pointless in some circumstances to require that as a requirement for a valid protest. I can understand it in small dinghy classes when you're in close proximity, but for large keel boats, when you're miles apart, potentially, just seems a silly requirement for a valid protest.
But Bryan, there is an exception, isn't there?
Yeah, I'd just like to say this. 30 years ago, if you'd asked me this question, I would have a long list. But in my time, 20 years, 25 years on the racing rules, we resolved all these. I mean, did you know that you used to, if you got squeezed out at a mark or something and you were in the right, you had room, but they didn't give you room, but you legally had room. You had to protest the other boat, even though you hadn't done anything wrong. And I thought that's totally unreasonable. Also, do you remember the luffing rule in Master Beam? And Bill Benson and I were arguing about this at a racing rules committee of World ISO, and I put on a blackboard and I put some boats into position. And I said, "Now, is that boat Master Beam?" I set it up because I knew what the answer would be. And Bill Benson said yes. And I asked a European, and he said no. And I said, "Who thinks no? Who thinks yes?" And they're all. This is the Racing Rules Committee of World Sailing, or what is World Sailing now. And so we resolved that we must get rid of the rule because nobody understands it. If we don't understand it, what about the poor old sailors? So I'm afraid my answer is that it's we've pretty well done all the good things. However, when I update my books, I have to get somebody who's on the Racing Rules Committee now, something like Anna Maria, and she has to explain some rules. I think, why have you changed that? Why have they changed that? And sometimes she knows, sometimes she doesn't know. And one this last time was to do with life jackets, where there was a standalone rule that said you have to wear personal buoyancy. And then there was a rule about how it was brought in, how you said, whether the rule could comply. And I said, well, it stands alone. You've got it wrong. And she said, oh my God, I see what you mean. She went back to Dick Rose, and Dick Rose came back to her and said, oh my God, thank goodness we've seen it before the rules are published. And they obviously did a quick change. But I mean, to be honest, they're pretty good now. And people who want them to be even simpler probably can't be. It's quite a complex sport. I don't know that you can get them. So perhaps the mark rounding rules could be made simpler. I'm not quite sure how. So I'm going to fudge it, I'm afraid, and not come up with an answer.
Okay, well, I think one thing I could say.
Question. Sorry, if I could ask one further question. Is there space for an amateur rule book around the can sailing for the average guy that's sailing his local yacht club in a local event, and leaving the more complex rule book for national championships and for international championships and the Olympics?
But Hamish, if you did that and there was an incident and it wasn't covered by your amateur rule book, what are you going to do? And also, who's responsible for the damage?
Yes.
Hamish, I'll take you up on that. There was a rule book that I called it the Rules and Brief Card when I started at US, what was then YRU, in '79. And I got on a plastic, it was plasticized thing that fit in a number 10 envelope. And it had the code flags on one side, what they meant for the race committee. The other side had 10 rules and I drafted it. And then a lot of people, particularly Greg Bemis, and people said, oh, you can't do that. But Greg Bemis said, no, this is a good idea. Let's try it. And he helped me write and rewrite. Bill Benson wasn't wild about it. Dick Rose wasn't wild about it, but they came around, and that card still exists. And we sold We sold thousands. Bryan, this was used and still is used in racing where there aren't any protests. It's just for people to go out and go around.
But Tom, the RY did the same thing. I did the same thing as you did. I wrote a thing, but it wasn't we were changing them or making them more simple. It was just a simple explanation of the rules, and we simply didn't cover the very complex situation. They were still valid, but we didn't cover them. So I think there's room for that simple rules book. Yeah, absolutely.
Correct.
And by the way, ours was called, to start with, Beginner's Guide to the Racing Rules. And after a couple of years, we'd sold about 100. And then we changed it to a brief guide or something to the racing rules. And we sold thousands. Yeah. People didn't like to think that they're holding a beginner's guide.
Well, I don't, Clark Chapel will know if that card still exists, but we sold thousands of them, and they were $1 a card. It wasn't a big deal, 10 for $10 back in the day. But the best thing that you all on the rules committee did, in my opinion, we used to have a terrible rule called Rule, what was it, 33, I think. I can't remember.
Yeah.
And if that was that if two boats collided and neither protested, a third party could protest and both boats would be disqualified. In other words, if you just said, hey, we don't know if we hit, we don't want to worry about this, that caused more angst and more heartburn and more people, I think, to quit the sport. What do you mean I got thrown out? I wasn't at fault. Oh, the other guy was at fault. I didn't feel like protesting. I had to go home and deal with my family.
Well, people will say you were at fault because you were required to protest if you had a collision.
Well, you were under that ridiculous rule, the tattletale rule.
I couldn't agree with you more. I was the leader in getting rid of that Rule 33.
Good for you.
I remember it very well.
Yeah, Clark,
but it does show you that we have a system where you don't, if you think you're in the right, you don't have to protest.
Right.
That's the important thing.
I mean, it was always, you compared it to civil matters, and if you're driving down the road and somebody infringed the rule and caused, you're the one that's going to get penalized. Excuse me. Yeah, the crazy rules are why people leave our sport. Peter Taylor says. Well, I think you all have done a great job. I argued about the simplification of the rules when you all did that, and said, well, you guys are smarter than I, and I'll stick to my knitting, which in those days was battling Hamish or working with Hamish on the America's Cup.
Tom, when I started sailing, I was about 8 years old. We had different rules here than you had in America.
Well, and the Germans, notwithstanding the Germans, in Germany, port tack had right-of-way over starboard tack.
Yeah. And I don't think that is right, actually. It's just because they call what we call starboard tack, they call port.
Well, but yes, that's correct. But people didn't realize that port board to them was starboard tack to us, or whatever it was. Yeah. Okay, enough of this. We're in 2 hours here, and I think we've covered most of the rules stuff. Thanks for all the questions and comments. I've still got some stuff to cover. We're going to keep going here because we got 2 big events starting up this weekend. We got the Ocean races going. Starting on Sunday, and also we got Sail GP is fired back up in Singapore, so I want to run as promised, a little preview on that. I'd postpone it to Tuesday, but if we did, it would be after the fact. So, gentlemen.
Okay, if you're chucking off myself and Hamish, I would just like to take the opportunity of thanking all those people who wrote in comments I saw on your board. I couldn't read them, but anyway, thanks for their participation. It's absolutely amazing.
Well,
yeah, I can read a few now. Yeah.
Now anyway, you know. Thanks, Tom. Now you know what the FOSI are. Yeah. We've been telling you. Hamish yesterday mentioned the FOSI, and Bryan wrote me this morning. He said, "What are these FOSI? Fuzzy? What are they?" Friends of Sailing Illustrated. They are the brightest, coolest group of sailors, and they're all around the world. Very tuned in, and we love them to death. And
absolutely,
Julia. They love Julia even more than me. I'm hurt. I'm hurt by that.
Well, that's not it. That's not difficult.
It's not difficult. You're absolutely right, Julia.
Yeah. No. I'm envious of our FOSIs.
No, we love them to death, and they are great contributors, and that's why Julia likes to say, go back and read the comments, because we've only covered of just a few of them. And this is one of the few shows where I can say that the number of viewers, Clark Chapin will back me up on this, the number of viewers has gone up as the show's gone on. So people are texting other people and say, hey, you ought to hear these croutons, what they're talking about. Hamish Ross on the left, Bryan Willis on the right. It's getting late in London, though not that late, 23:03. Hamish in Auckland, it's 12:03 tomorrow on Saturday. Enjoy the rest of your days and the rest of your evening. Bryan, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Can we repeat this again sometime soon?
Absolutely. Be great fun.
Love to.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks, Tom.
Ciao.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so we do have a little bit more to go here because, as I said, I promised you previews of these races. Julie, you had a comment?
No, I was just going to say what a great discussion and how wonderful those guys are.
Well, the best thing we did today was to get Bryan to pick up his laptop and move it to wherever we did the tech check yesterday.
I know.
So his Wi-Fi improved. That's why we do tech checks, so that we get everything set, and then invariably somebody goes and changes something for the lighting, or they're more comfortable in their chair, or whatever.
Yeah.
This day in history, you have to do this because we want to celebrate the French today. What happened in 1908? Do you know who that is?
It looks like one of the Wright brothers.
No, and this is why I ran this, because we always think about aviation, the start of aviation with the Wright brothers and so on, but there's a guy called Henri Farman who lived in the late 1800s and all the way to almost 1960. He was a British-French aviator and aircraft designer and manufacturer with his brother, same deal as the Wright brothers, Maurice Farman. Before dedicating himself to aviation, he gained fame as a sportsman, specifically in cycling. Again, the Wrights. Cycling was a big deal, and motor racing. Henri took French nationality. He was a Brit, and he moved to France. And on this day in 1908, he won the Grand Prix d'Aviation. He became the first person to fly an observed circuit of more than 1 kilometer. So he did a loop, winning the Grand Prix in this day in 1908. And that was quite an achievement. A Scientific American covered it. But in the meantime, not only this was in January, but later in the year, he did a cross-country trip on this plane with bicycle wheels. But if that's a plane, it looks to me like a flying boxcar container. I mean, it's or a box kite even. Yeah. This was Henri Farman's first cross-country flight later in 1908. So a famous guy. We like to cover all the nationalities, and obviously precursor to cool things in our sport. Aviation has always been. Let's get on to Sail GP and wrap this show up with a couple of things here. This is a shot from today, one of the few days they've had any breeze in Singapore. It's a light air venue. They're talking about sailing with only 4 people instead of 6, and with the extended the big wings. It takes place tomorrow, actually tonight, our time, but tomorrow and Sunday in Singapore. This is the image of the week by Felix Deemer. After a 2-month break, the Sail GP circuit settled back to work this week as the league goes to Singapore for the first time for the 8th. Singapore is the first Asian Sail Grand Prix, not counting Australia, obviously. First time for the 8th Grand Prix of Season 3, which takes place on Saturday and Sunday. Quentin Delapierre's French team seen here in training on Friday. Go back and look at that great shot. On Friday. So today, will try to continue their solid momentum after victory in Cadiz, their very first win, and a second place in Dubai, which now sees them up to 3rd place overall behind Australia and New Zealand. There are 3 remaining Grands Prix after Singapore. That is in Sydney, Auckland, and then here in San Francisco. Here's a tune-up, warm-up preview.
Looking forward to the next couple of days and weekend here in Singapore. Quite light winds today and expected through to the weekend. But also, you know, time's enough to get foiling with the big 28-metre wing on. You know, good test for all of the teams and a very tight little race course close to the city shoreline. I think there's a really good chance of 4-person crew. We'll have to wait and see. It's around about 12 kilometres an hour wind speed is sort of the cut-off. Anything over that, then we're getting closer to having 6 people on board, which is good because you want to get the full squad on board and get everyone involved as we ideally can. It's great having Hannah back on board. She's such an amazing sailor, really just jumping back on board after, you know, pretty chunky time away from the boat and straight back into it, performing really well. We're first race for 2023. We've got another 3 events after this, you know, with the final in San Francisco. So yeah, we're getting to the business end of the season, and every point's critical. We're right on the cusp of the top 3, which we need to get for the grand final, and that's really our goal.
I don't think they're actually going that slow. Those were slow motion shots in that nice video from Sail GP. 12 kilometers per hour, you know what that is in knots? 6.5.
Yeah.
That's what they're expecting. You know, Singapore's on the equator. It's light, it's hot, it's humid. There was an incident in the practice sailing today, I guess, yesterday or today. New Zealand driver Peter Burling has spoken about the frustrating pre-race contact incident, which saw the team docked 4 event points and 2 season points ahead of racing. New Zealand was found at fault for an avoidable collision with the United States team, Timmy Spithill's team, during practice starts on Thursday, so it was yesterday, and was docked points in line with SailGP's contact and dommage policy. Here's the video.
Canada now. No higher. We're going to get locked out of the Medina at the moment.
14, 13.
Want to get over them still? Big effort. Yeah.
12.
Happy to press a bit if you want. There's Spain there. You're going to be.
7.
Yeah, we're just sitting above
10. 9 and a
above
half.
USA. Below
8.
USA now. Big. Denmark. One coming up. Jim.
5.
Below USA.
4.
Yeah, on slow, please. Slow.
3.
Fuck me. Fuck. Yeah,
So, Julia,
Yeah.
not only he gets docked some event points, he gets a finger wave from you, right?
That's more serious. Yeah.
He said, F me. More than once, maybe. I'm not sure.
Yeah, 3 times at least.
Pete Burling. But thanks. Mary Jude Szymanski submitted that. And again, I thank the FOSI for sending in links to stories, images, whatever. And Mary Jude, I'm not sure I would have caught that, Mary Jude, otherwise. Thank you for sending that in. I'm not an expert, Mary Jude said, but if you keep tapping other boats, especially in pre-race, you can tap your way right out of the competition, not only for this weekend, but also at the final event at the end of the season. Needless loss of points is not efficient. Absolutely. Burling should be frustrated about his performance. I think you could tell by his reaction. He was. I checked that video. You could see he fell off to avoid touching. He had a boat to leeward, too. He was trying to, I think, keep clear. But it looked like he misjudged and headed back up too soon. It's like he needed to come back up about 3 or 4 heartbeats later to stay clear. I think it's a pretty good point. Mary Jude Szymanski, thank you for that and for sending that comment along and letting us use it. Ed Worley saying, yeah, nice to see real footage and reactions on the water. Mary Jude, well stated.
Indeed.
And the other comment that I didn't mention, Ed Worley, who was in Fremantle, he was in during the 87 Cup, 86, 87, with Newport Harbor's team, with Eagle, the boat known as Beagle, because it was not very quick. Ed Worley said that, yeah, he remembered that whole defense trials turning into a pile of crutonicism, shall we say. Okay, so Bravo Zulu, I wanted to say one thing more about what's going on. I get a lot of stuff over the door, under the door, emails, and so on, PR promotion from these teams. But the team that is doing the best job is the GBR squad. They're sending out images, they're doing stuff on social media I don't even look at, like TikTok and Instagram. I don't have time or the inclination. But Bravo Zulu to Team GBR for doing, in my opinion, the best job with PR of any team in any sailing event. They sent this picture out. They sent out a nice long release about the return of Hannah Mills As Sir Ben Ainsley and his Great Britain Sail GP teams head across to Singapore, the team is excited to welcome back the current World Sailor of the Year, Hannah Mills, to the team lineup for the first time this season. Singapore will see Mills step back into the strategist role for the British team alongside Hannah Diamond, adding a second female athlete to the GBR squad for consecutive events. Bravo Zulu. And here's a nice video about Hannah that they put out today.
I'm so excited to get back on board the F50. It's been, October last year, so it would have been like 15 months or something since I've been on a boat, let alone an F50. I desperately want to get back to racing and get into that grand final in San Francisco in a few months' time. And I'm really lucky that the GBR team have been really flexible and kind of just really accommodating, I guess, to the new dynamic and trying to get me back up to speed and back racing when I'm ready. So I've been not on the boat for quite a while because I was pregnant and then had my baby in October. I was with the team up until July, still at the events and helping out sort of off the boat. I have had a good amount of reflection time, and I think it definitely makes you think about why you really love a sport and why you really love competition and what's important to you. And sometimes in life it's really powerful to have a break and to get a different perspective. So I feel quite lucky in a way that pregnancy enforced that on me. So yeah, it's been a really interesting kind of year. It will inspire me more to be more than just an athlete, more so than I already am. I think you've got a little person that ultimately will look up to everything you're doing and see everything you're doing and be inspired by that, so you want it to be the right things. And definitely, there's a lot of work to be done in climate change and fighting that, and trying to create a more equal world for everybody. So yeah, it's a huge inspiration. You can hear it in the background. Yeah, it's a privilege to have the opportunity to be able to do those things.
Nicely done.
Nicely done.
Sienna's 2040 Olympic sailing training begins. I'm not sure when. maybe with Fox, Ben's little one. We can team them up for 2040 or whatever the Olympics is that they both want to get to.
Nice video. Great gal. Great team. Well done. Bravo Zulu. A lot of you agreeing. Peter Taylor and others agreeing. And as Stingray says, the forecast is for very light wind, 29-meter wing, and big foils, maybe only 4 people or up on the boat. The race course looks like a reaching start as usual, downwind, 1 windward leg, and a reach to the finish. You talk about light air. That looks like the race course from what the materials are that they've sent out. That is the Sail Grand Prix in Singapore tomorrow. Well, it's tonight here on the West Coast. Best place probably to watch it is on YouTube. You can watch it on their Facebook page as well. It's at 10 p.m. tonight, Pacific time, live on TV, on YouTube and their Facebook page, Saturday and Sunday at 0600 UTC. 2200 Pacific tonight. That's 0600 your Saturday and Sunday mornings in Europe. And down under, you can do the math because Perth is on the same time as Singapore. And in Perth right now, it's 07:17 in the morning, so you can do that math. Don Lunabos, good. Okay, thanks for all that. I've got a Fosy Focus. I really like this, and have a look. Not long. Julia's looking at her watch. She must be getting hungry or maybe need to go to the pot. I don't know. But here we've got a Fosy Focus. You're going to like this. And this segment is a Fosy Focus, but it's really about cool people.
Yes.
That's what this is. And I want to celebrate them because this PR statement came through. I didn't know this was happening. This group called We Are Foiling, which is it's an amalgamation now, these foiling, the annual foiling week and so on. But We Are Foiling announces that GAC Pindar, that's Andrew Pindar's company, as the official logistics partner of the Foiling Youth World Series and confirms for the next 3 years its historic support of Foiling Week at Lake Garda, which we've been covering. GAC Pindar is the global go-to provider for marine sport, leisure, and event logistics. This is a commercial, but I love this company, and I love what Andrew and his team are doing, not only for these guys, but for other events, including the Ocean Race. Part of the Foiling Youth World Series, the multi-class competition for youth teams and the most influential sailing entities on the international scene. Creating with a specific aim of training foiling future players, the series will start in the second half of this year and will take place in key sailing venues worldwide. The event will be realized within the We Are Foiling Events ecosystem framework. It's a mouthful. With the support of World Sailing, the China Sports Industry Group, and Hamish, who's still watching, the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron. Not the Yacht Squadron, but the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron. Now, this guy, who's also been on the show, Luca Rizzotti, is the founder and president of Foiling Week, now called We Are Foiling, Foiling Youth World Series as well. We started collaborating with Gak Pindar in 2015, immediately sharing vision and intentions. This is a partnership that is not only limited to solving operational issues, but extends to a common value framework. Like Andrew Pindar, I am on the Magenta Project board. That's the female promotion board and foundation in the UK, I think UK and beyond.
Yeah.
And our initiatives have resulted in a 3-fold increase in female attendance at the event.
That's great.
And there's our good friend Andrew Fosey, both Luca and Andrew. Andrew Pindar, founding partner of Gak Pindar, quote, the new Foiling Youth World Series by We Are Foiling is starting with a clean slate, giving talented youth sailors the opportunity from day one of competing with 50-50 balanced equity between male and female athletes. This is why we are particularly proud and excited to be chosen as the official logistics partner of the series, convinced as we are that this will provide a vital springboard of talent for women and men as they progress on their foiling journey. So I pinged Andrew today, I knew he was in Alicante, and he came right back with this picture tonight in Alicante. He said, yep, there's Andrew and Luca in Alicante. They wish all the Fosies the best, and they appreciate this Fosie focus of some cool people.
Absolutely.
And some cool Fosie, not only here, but in our sport. We're delighted to have them as friends. The America's Cup, Julia?
I can hardly wait.
There's one American or maybe two American Magic videos. Hardly anything else. Crickets from the America's Cup, AC37 Cup date. That is it. And I didn't shorten that, which gets us to the finish line. And that painting I love, or not the finish line, the last leg. And this last leg to Gloucester in Massachusetts, we've been featuring. And this is the Ocean Race preview. The route for this year's race starts Sunday in Alicante. And both the VO65s and the Yamocas are sailing down to Cabo Verde in Africa, on the Horn of Africa. Beautiful place. I've not been. Have you been, Julia? Then down to see Ted Ryman in Cape Town. And then across this very long leg.
Oh, yeah. It was 3,400 miles or something.
I think it was more than that even. Up to Itajaí in Brazil. Somebody had that the other day. I think it was more like 8,000 miles, wasn't it? It was a lot longer leg.
Yeah.
From Itajaí up to Newport, Rhode Island, Brad Reed will be hosting us up there with Sail Newport. Looks like should be a lot of fun, a good event as usual. That's in Newport Harbor there on the west-east passage of Narragansett Bay. Over to Aarhus in Denmark to check in with Gordon Smith. And then from Denmark down to flyby in Kiel, Germany. There's your, I played this video before, Julie. That's your team.
Yes.
John Kostecki. And around to Den Haag, The Hague, where they finished last time, but this time they're going to continue around Spain and back into the Med and finish in Genoa, the grand finale, Genova. And the Mocha 60s are going to do the entire loop around the planet. The 65s are just sailing point to point on the certain legs in Europe. The V65s are not, Alex is saying no, they're not going around the planet. That's the preview of the ocean race, which starts in Alicante on Sunday. I'm not going to bore you with all of this, but go on to their website. It's actually quite good. They had a press conference, was it today? May have been earlier today, 13th of July, it is today. The VO65 skippers had a press conference, and these guys, I like that they're sending out the names with the photos. It makes it easier for lazy journalists like me or people who are hard-pressed to put a show together on a timeline. But notice what they didn't put in there, Julia. They put the skippers' names in, but no countries. And we started that on here. Some other World Sailing does it. The laser class does it. The fin class and the start. Put parenthesis, whatever their country, 3-letter Olympic code. Everybody knows those codes pretty well. Yeah. The live coverage is a $100 package in Europe. There's a great piece in the Tip and Shaft today with the owners of this race and what's gone right and what's gone wrong. It's a tough future, as we discussed on the show the other day. Sponsorship is limited and tough. Come by as we're in a recession in Europe. We're going into recession, it looks like, here in this country. But they also had a press conference for the IMOCA skippers. There are 5 boats, crewed IMOCA, 60s going around. We'll be cheering, no doubt, for Charlie Enright, but also for Boris Herman, because we've just, he on the, where's Boris? He's on the left, right? And we're quite fond of him, and we'll be cheering for him as well as for American Charlie Enright and see how that all goes. Here's a little bit of a preview video released today.
For the first time, this edition of the Ocean Race features 5 international IMOCA crews competing in the toughest test of a team in sport. Leading the field is 11th Hour Racing Team, sailing under an American flag. First to enter, first to ready their boat, and unshakable in their confidence, they look set to dominate with a top-class crew of experienced sailors. Skipper Charlie Enright is back for his 3rd attempt at glory, and he boasts 3 previous winners of the Ocean Race among his team. On paper, 11th Hour Racing Team have everything needed to be victorious. Will it be their year? Team Wholesome PRB is skippered by another sailor returning to the race, Kevin Escoffier. The Frenchman has competed twice before, winning the last edition on board Dongfeng Race Team. He's no stranger to adventure, abandoning his sinking yacht in the Southern Ocean during the 2020 Vendée Globe. But since that close call, Escoffier has put in thousands of miles offshore, and he's backed up by a crew of tough and fast sailors with a lot to prove. With a background in engineering, Escoffier has the intellect and the winning experience to be a contender again this time. Hailing from Germany and always sailing with a smile is Boris Herman and Team Milizia. Their new IMOCA has turned heads with a design that caters for the wild conditions of the Southern Ocean. The crew list features a tight-knit international mix of rookies and experience, such as French navigator Nico Lundven, back for his 3rd go at the Ocean Race. Cheered on by their passionate fans, Team Milizia set out to prove you can win and have fun. Guyot Environment Team Europe won the Ocean Race Europe in 2021 on an old design with great crew work, skill and favourable weather conditions. Unable to rely on just their wits for the round-the-world race, they're back with a foiling boat with Vendée Globe pedigree. Benjamin Detrue and Robert Stanjek have proven themselves in offshore sailing in the Olympics. But experience in this race comes from Annie Lush and Tamara Echegoyen, who have lapped the world before. Biotherm's Paul Meyer is a proven IMOCA heavyweight. He won the Route de Rhum in 2018 and in 2021 was victorious in the Fastnet, the Defi Azimuth, and finished as a IMOCA champion. His boat stretches performance close to breaking point, so his team will need to manage risk and reward. While few of the crew can boast experience in the Ocean Race, there's enough Vendée Globe, Olympic and foiling talent among the sailors to make this team an explosive combination. 5 elite teams, 7 challenging legs, 1 fascinating contest.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, on paper, these teams all look pretty darn good.
Absolutely.
For the Ocean Race, and I hope they all hold together.
I do
because
too.
This is going to be tough. These boats are normally sailed single-handed or double-handed, and they're crewed now. And in any event, we'll follow it. There's not that much video as there hasn't been in the past. They're scrimping. It's an $80 or $90 million budget total for the series, is what I read on the that newsletter that comes out on Fridays. Go have a look at it. It's it's very interesting read if you're into the gory details of all this. Starts on Sunday in Alicante, and we'll be following it as well. That gets us to the D block, and we do have some Crutonicism for you. Not as good as, Julia, not as good as that video from the other day of the lady, and I guess she was Australian. That was an Australian television channel.
Yeah.
Where she said, that footy, that terrible game in the States between the San Francisco 69ers.
Yeah. Yes.
The guy's shaking his head at just the right moment. The San Francisco 69ers, who, by the way, kick off the NFL playoffs tomorrow at 1:30.
1:30.
Tomorrow. Okay, let's go look here. Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. I can't resist. Sorry, Gordon Smith. I cannot resist. Several of you sent this to me. First to send it was Greg Phillips. That book, the king is saying, that book is hilarious, and the twat thinks I'm his dad. Are you going to buy the book? Are you going to watch the Netflix?
I probably won't watch Netflix. I may look at the book, but it's not number one on my list.
Stingray is saying, yes, go the Seahawks. His team in Seattle are playing the 69ers in San Francisco tomorrow. We'll be watching Stingray and thinking about you as our team goes on to win. I'm quite confident they will. Thanks, Greg Phillips, for that.
That's a great picture.
Now this is for the nerds. Stingray will like this. Ken Saban will like this. Clark will like this. Cowboys in the Old West used to hang lanterns on their saddles at night to help them find their way home, Spock is saying there in the old original Star Trek. This was an early form of satellite navigation. That was funny, I thought.
Yes.
Sailing related.
Satellite.
Ted Ryman, only Ted Ryman. I don't know where he finds his things.
I know, and I love his humor.
They're terrific.
Yeah.
Keep them coming, please. And then finally, you'd think that maybe Andrew McIrvin sent it. I Googled my symptoms. It turns out I just need to go sailing.
Yeah.
Bill Haynes is saying, go Bills and Chiefs. Yeah, there's some other playoff games. I Googled my symptoms. I just need to go sailing. Julia.
Yes.
I got to play with my camera. I haven't played with it yet. I got a close up here. Oops, I got to go away from that PIP, though. That's Crutonic. And then on this camera, I love this camera. I've got a close-up of you, Julia.
Uh-oh.
Look, you can look over here at camera 2. We don't even have a cameraman. The thing is about, it's about 3 inches tall. We can go up to the Bird G up above you, and we can even go to Jonathan Frank, who's on an airplane. He's flying a 777 to London. He said he's going to watch it in replay. There's his painting, which we love, here on the wall of Studio B at the Beach Street Yacht Club with our fancy new Insta360 Link camera.
Yes, it is. It is. Remarkable too.
It is, and it's autofocus, and it's auto. And these cameras all have autofocus now, and they all have auto, irises and so on. Yeah. White balance, auto, but they don't work very well. This works remarkably well. This camera.
I just did a flashback of
camera 2.
Of doing the first shows with an iPhone.
Well, remember that we had an iPhone on a tripod.
Yeah.
And we were in front of a TV set in Studio A out here in the America's Cup Lounge. Yeah. Okay, that gets us to the finish line. And again, I'm using this. I just like this a lot.
Mm-hmm.
From the 2018 Rolex Sydney Hobart Yacht Race. Anybody else has photos we should use from your club or your class? Happy to use them. Julia, your witness.
Yes, this is one show that lots of people would like to like.
Yeah, we'll share this widely because like, follow, and share if you will, please. And thanks again to Bryan and to Hamish. Terrific stuff. Lots of thumbs up, lots of hearts. Michael Jabara is watching. Michael, we've featured you at the top of the show. Go back and watch the beginning when we get off the air here. And if you would, please, we appreciate very much those of you who are patrons, like Michael Jabara. In fact, patreon.com/join/Sailing Illustrated. Give us $1 or $2 or $5 or more a month to help keep us on the air with our equipment. Notice how much better the audio was in today's show, Julia?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, Michael Jabara is still smarter than all of us. He flew from Michigan.
I know.
Over us. He looked down at us in our sad, sodden state here, and it's raining. I don't know what it looks like out here.
Yeah.
The sun's out a little bit. It's not too bad. Thanks, everybody, and thanks to those who give us images and video and audio for the show. Julia, final thought?
Rain, go away.
It will.
Come again another day.
It's gone here by Tuesday. We're going to get another 3 to 5 inches. I'll have to clean out the garage floor again.
Yes.
I won't tell them what happened to me when I was doing that the other day. Don't you either, tell them.
I won't.
It's embarrassing.
Peter Taylor says the audio was impeccable.
Yeah, I apologize again for that audio on Tuesday, and it was not their fault. It was not Google's, or not Google, Microsoft who owns Skype. It was my fault here in the system, our fancy system, and we have fixed that. And we figured out what was wrong, and it shall not happen again. I shall will it. It will not happen again. Hope you all have a great rest of your weekend down under. You've already started Saturday noon down there in Auckland. A little later in Sydney, a little earlier rather in Sydney, 10:34 in the morning on your Saturday. Hope you go out and do some sailing. Hope your rain goes away, Hamish Ross and all of you down under. Yeah. And see you on Tuesday. In the meantime, sail fast, sail safe, and have fun. We better turn the audio on. Speaking of audio, ciao for now. Julia, you like that music, right? You approve.
Yes,
Julia said to me after we got off the air Tuesday, she said, I normally don't like steel drums, but I like this music.
I do too. It's a little...
You said, I like this music.
Yeah.
Right?
I did.